It's a beautiful time. The year 2020. Nothing portends trouble if it were not for the sudden appearance of portals that enveloped the entire planet. What it was and where it led to remained a mystery. To solve the issue, it was decided to send troops, which later did not return. The authorities had already resigned themselves to the fact that they would not be able to uncover the truth on one of the unfortunate days when something frightening began to emerge from the portals. A horde of monsters, previously known only from books, began to flicker into existence, covering not only the earth, but also the sky. Everyone who was in their path could not survive. Humanity wouldn't stand a chance if it weren't for patrons creating hunters. Only these unique people were able to strike back at the evil that held every earthling in fear. Plaques appeared above the would-be hunters, saying that the patrons had chosen them, endowing them with special powers that could be enhanced over time. Until recently, ordinary, unremarkable people became real heroes with incredible strength, capable of taking down any giant. Among them all, there was one distinguished by his unique skill, Player, the Demon King, with his immortal army and ability to control fire. But thanks to the influence of 12 great heroes who were all considered gods, all mention of this unique hunter disappeared from the pages of history, and the recognized gods themselves decided to create their own Eden. Hunters were considered evolutionarily advanced, and people unworthy of this title, slaves. The world remained under the rule of the hunters. 100 years later, summertime, our hero ran as fast as he could through a green grove. Suddenly, he stopped and started breathing heavily, as if he had run a marathon without a break. Sitting on a tree branch, his teacher wondered if this was all his student was capable of. He explained to the boy that if his goal was to become a world-changing hunter, he needed to learn how to stand out so his patrons would notice him. Song-gu Hyun shared that he didn't have to jump above his head to be noticed by the patrons. They just started supporting him. Realizing that running was difficult for the young man, the hunter suggested that he do something else. Suddenly, a spear appeared in front of them, a weapon often used by hunters in battle. The guy was clearly amazed at how you could save the world with a stick. His mentor reassured himself that the young man did not understand many things, but he was sure that soon he would become a real hunter. The young man immediately remembered the book given to him by Song-gu Hyun that described the crimes committed by the hunters. Then he finally gave up. To the teacher, the idea that his student would never become a hunter seemed so silly that he decided to get through to him by slapping him. It wasn't out of spite, but to remind him not to give up. And when it came to the book, he asked if our hero still had it. This book is not only the autobiography of the Demon King, but also the memory of his parents, who lost their lives to hunters, so he always had the book with him. Athena, one of the 12 gods, watched their conversation from above. She had come to Earth for a specific person. When she felt that the one she was looking for was very close to her, she immediately decided to use magic. Athena's magical beams were aimed directly at the people talking, and they were already beginning to suspect something. The mentor couldn't let anything happen to the guy, so he used his power to throw him away from the beams. Watching the explosion that enveloped everything in the neighborhood, she was satisfied. The goddess descended directly to the ground in front of the young man, who was clearly frightened and had no time to realize who was in front of him, what had happened, or how it was even possible. The first thought that came to his mind and frightened him was that there was a hunter in front of him, but what she had come for remained a mystery to him. Before he could guess who the girl in front of him was, he unconsciously bowed to her. She had succeeded in subduing him. Suddenly, several ambassadors appeared before her, praising her and worshipping her as well, clearly indicating that she was above their rank. Then, our hero realizes that in front of him is the Queen of Eden herself, the owner of the highest rank. Meanwhile, she was only concerned about where Song-gu Hyun had gone. She clearly gave orders to her subordinates to find him and bring him to her. Like zombies, the men obeyed her unconditionally. Their eyes shone so brightly that it was clear their minds had long belonged to her. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a guy worshipping Her Majesty. When she scanned him, she realized that he was just an ordinary man with no power. At that moment, the young man's heart was pounding like never before, for he was holding a book that, by the will of the 12 gods, should not exist. How relieved he was when Athena, deciding he was a common slave, turned around and was about to leave. The young man exhaled, thinking that the girl had really decided to leave him alone. He was willing to accept that he was a slave, as long as he wasn't touched. But as soon as the young man raised his head, the goddess was right in front of him, looking down at him. The boy immediately shuddered at the mention of a slight tinge of magic from him. He guessed she was attracted to the book, but she didn't realize it right away. She was just alarmed by his behavior, his fear as if he was hiding something. Without thinking, Athena gave the order to lay out everything he had been hiding from her and tell her what she wasn't supposed to know. Without wanting to, but unable to resist, he took the book out of his jacket and handed it to her. He realized that if she had it, it would be the end of everything. Sweat poured down his face. He realized that his life and the life of all mankind depended directly on this book. Anything that did not please Eden would be erased. Athena used magic to obtain the book, and as soon as it flew into her hands, the forest was filled with laughter. It was what she was looking for, but before she could grab the book, she was distracted. It was Hyung. With a swift kick, he managed to throw her away so far that he could buy time to talk. Our hero couldn't believe his happiness and burst into tears. He had no hope of saving the world after the book was practically in Athena's hands. But the mentor did not lose his optimism, and with a smile on his face, he cheered up the guy, saying that he was suitable for managing to keep the book at his place. Sungu Hyun apologized for not having had time to tell everyone, as he didn't think they would find him so quickly. He left the book with the young man to save everyone, but he knew that being a mere man, it would be hard to preserve such a significant item. So he decided to do something for which he needed his sword. Their essential business could be interrupted by the returning Athena, who was coming at the young men at breakneck speed. Without time to think, the young man had to accept his mentor's offer, even though he didn't fully understand what it was. Before he realized what was happening, he felt a piercing in his heart that was like being pierced by his teacher's sword. Clearly, he was not expecting it, and he was shocked. On top of that, Hyung's request that if they met, he be nice to him had gotten to him. What Hyun did was to enter into a contract whereby the young man was patronized and transported to an unknown world. The boy couldn't believe he was unharmed because he was stabbed through and through. The fact that he was stronger led him to think he was a hunter. It was a mystery where he was, but there were only rocks and not a single soul around. He realized that he was inside the gate. As one might expect, he was not alone. There were soft but audible footsteps. Without thinking for a second, he immediately hid behind a large rock, leaving him to observe who this intruder was. He was pretty surprised to see a small green creature in front of him. He knew he was looking at the goblin mentioned in his autobiography. Even though goblins are the weakest creatures of this world, they are still dangerous, as they possess everything necessary to send a newcomer to the other world. The snide gaze of this creature, which had excellent hearing, was directed clearly at the rock where our hero was hiding. There was no choice, so he picked up a rock and threw it far away to distract the goblin, and he succeeded. As he approached the young man, the monster turned around, and at that moment, the boy grabbed the goblin's arm and gave him a blow that accidentally killed him. He didn't want to send anyone to the next world. He just wanted to scare the goblin and take away his weapon, but he failed to calculate his new power. After the deed he committed, he managed to draw the attention of the Demon King himself. But no sooner had he rejoiced than a moment later, a vast army of goblins was upon him, eager to avenge their own. It was frightening because he didn't want to fight in his plans. He wanted to avoid only one loss. And unfortunately, the goblin army wasn't the worst of it. More frightening was their leader. However, it was too early for our hero to think about the leader. First, he had to deal with his army. He was afraid that he was only a hunter for the first day and that he was not yet capable of fighting a battle. But he remembered his promise to Hyung to save the world. He cheered himself up by reminding himself what he was fighting for and getting the fallen angel's support. He picked up his sword. With eyes full of madness, he lunged at the angry crowd of goblins, scattering each one and striking them with a blow incompatible with life. From all sides, he tried to resist, but our hero was stronger. He just could not fall at the hands of the weakest opponent. Ruthlessly, he swung a spear that he had previously considered very strange. Now he realized that an ordinary stick could be a real weapon. At the moment of the battle, he remembered the fall when he had been training with Hyun, and he had told him that one day he would become a true hunter with no equal. It was like this. When there were hundreds of lifeless goblin bodies lying around, his skill level suddenly increased, but there was still a big but. Boss. The goblin leader, waiting for the primary battle, had already prepared his bat and stared at the young man, who thought he was not ready for this fight. According to the rules, Defeating the boss requires a C rank, and our hero, being a beginner, has an E or F rank. He wasn't sure if he could beat the boss with his level, but he was determined not to give up. He picked up his spear, having gained power over fire, and was full of confidence in his victory. He was determined to go all in. As soon as the weapon was raised, the foremost goblin was already rushing towards his enemy, as many as he had seen. It was a powerful fight in which our hero emerged victorious, increasing his level in the process. Too bad his spear was damaged. Even though he had survived the ordeal, everything that had happened to him in the last 24 hours had taken its toll. He fell to the ground without strength. The guild hunters soon appeared. They were dumbfounded to see the lifeless bodies of the goblins, especially their boss. One of them heard strange noises and realized that the guy was alive and made sure to inform the other hunters. The young man ended up in the hospital on a drip. He was receiving a blood transfusion. He woke up abruptly and didn't immediately realize if it was all a dream or not. He reviewed all the events that had happened to him and recalled the hunters who had entered the gate. Suddenly, a nurse entered the room and asked him not to make any sudden movements, and then informed him who had brought him to them. She said that a representative of the association was to visit him, and that, in the meantime, he could rest. Satisfied and slightly in love with the new patient, the nurse immediately decided to leave the room when the young man suddenly called out to her, asking what year it was. She expected to hear any question, but not this one. Deciding that the patient had temporary memory problems, she answered, 2022. He immediately felt sick. He'd traveled back in time 100 years before he was born, 2 years since the gates opened on Earth. He realized he was in a time when people didn't have to stand out to be a hunter. It was a time when hunters became hunters because of their patrons, and he had that opportunity. The patron chose him. He immediately decided to take off all the IVs to leave this place. The nurse disapproved of his act, warning that such sudden movements and interruption of treatment could be dangerous to his health. Ignoring all her words, he walked past her and asked where the bathroom was, then headed for the exit. When he went into the bathroom and saw himself in the mirror, he couldn't believe it was him. The body was clearly not his. It was too muscular, and he was much taller. When he heard the noise, he turned around and thought someone was watching him. Given the recent incidents, it was hard not to be alarmed. A man in a black suit entered the bathroom. Before he could introduce himself, he offered to sit down at the table and explain everything to him. The mysterious stranger's name was Kim Soo-yeon, and he was a representative of the association. He knew that the young man had memory lapses. The purpose of his visit was to gather as much information as possible about our hero because, at that time, in that world, no one had any information about him. It was obvious that telling the whole truth would be very dangerous and risky, because it was not clear for what purposes the association wanted to use this information. He said that he was 23 years old, and his name was Lee Jun-kyung. He was surprised at himself for combining his name and the name of the Demon King. When he heard the name and realized it was all he could remember, he asked what had happened to him inside the gate and how he had felt that day. Without thinking long, Lee Jun-hyun told about the voice that gave him patronage. Then, the puzzle came together, and he was officially recognized as a hunter. He had to lie and say that all he remembered about hunters was that they were the chosen ones. After thanking him for the conversation and telling him that there was someone else who wanted to meet him, Kim Soo-young bowed. He realized that this was an important person in the world. As he looked at the figure of his interlocutor, Lee Jun-kyung, he noticed that he was very polite to him. He asked for information about himself, and then it dawned on him that his status as Demon King was the reason the gods were trying to hide it. The Demon King was much stronger than the others. Moreover, he wasn't a hunter. His specialty was his status as a player. His uniqueness was that he only grew stronger without the aid of hunting. And now, all the status and power of the Demon King was taken over by Lee Jun-kyung. Only he could finish what his patron started. The next morning, a nurse burst into the room with enthusiastic shouts and congratulations. She was obviously delighted to have a hunter in front of her. Although he was perplexed about what could be impressive about this event that would warrant congratulations, he thanked her. She saw hunters as people who had won the lottery because even newcomers could get rich without going underground. A new world on Earth was opening up to them. A hunter could choose a career as a blacksmith, creating magical items using the influence of mana. The hunter could choose a career as a blacksmith, creating magic items using the influence of mana. Or there was the possibility of becoming the bodyguard of some important person. Every rich man dreamed of hiring such a bulky man to protect him. Hearing the weak arguments that the girl thought would make him jump for joy, he was a little disappointed. The nurse suddenly remembered that she had forgotten to give him the things he had when he was in the portal. On that note, she congratulated him on his discharge. Walking out of the hospital, Lee Jun-kyung stopped in front of a busy street, looking at how people managed to live their colorful lives in a time like this, a time of heroes. The noise of the city roads was interrupted by the sound of an inspector. He invited the new hunter to register with the association and sent him to his apartment. He congratulated Lee Jun-kyung for immediately becoming a S-rank hunter. It was a rare event in the world. Already at the Hunters Association for registration, he learned that ranks are given according to the alphabet. But he was lucky. More prospects and authority. After successfully completing the registration, the inspector escorted Lee Jun-kyung to his apartment, which was now officially his new home. When he opened the door, he was dumbfounded to see the old furniture. It seemed to him that if hunters were so valued, their living conditions would be appropriate. Though he tried not to show it, looking away almost brought a tear to his eye. It was a special day for him, as it was for every newcomer. But after Kim Soo-young told him that someone was waiting to meet him, he came to his senses again. He was afraid that some knew he was from the future. Not expecting such a reaction, the inspector tensed up, stating that the head of the Major League Guild that had saved him was waiting for him. Even though he had the option to refuse, Lee Jun-kyung decided to accept the invitation to meet. He was very curious to get a glimpse of such an important person. Guild leader Yeo Seong-gu was very happy to meet the new hunter, even though he didn't understand his reaction. Lee Jun-kyung was surprised to see his teacher from the future standing before him. He was surprised and happy at the same time because he had never expected to see his own face. Yeo Seong-gu had no idea what such a reaction could be as he gazed at his bald head with delight. He was embarrassed because he knew how stupid it might look, but he couldn't help it. His happiness was overwhelming. The face seemed familiar to Yoo Seong-gu as well. He began to doubt that they didn't know each other. He thought they might have crossed paths somewhere before. The memories of his mentor flashed before Lee Jun-kyung's eyes. He bowed and thanked his mentor for saving him. Looking at him and knowing the truth, Lee Jun-kyung saw him as more than just the current leader of the Hunters Association. He realized that Heimdall was a forgotten hero. In bed that evening, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking that the body he had now didn't belong to him, even though the distinctive signs said otherwise. Looking over his status again, images of the Demon King flashed before his eyes. He guessed that his powers had been given to him by a fallen angel. He realized he'd been given a chance. By going back in time and gaining the power of the Demon King himself, he was allowed to change everything, to save the world. Not thinking it would ever happen again, Lee Jun-kyung had to start attending classes again. But this time, not at a regular school, but at a Hunters Association. Bae Sang-soo, the teacher who would be the first to teach the young hunters, entered the classroom. After he introduced himself, everyone fell silent. There were whispers around the classroom. Everyone was surprised that a B-rank hunter had come to teach them. It was too great an honor for the newcomers. The teacher said that after the seminar, everyone would have to choose a weapon with which to take the final test. He asked questions that had a lot of people willing to answer. The newcomers knew how hunters awakened and that they could upgrade their skills. Some of the methods of pumping included closing gates, achieving goals to draw the attention of patrons, and offering extra items. It was possible to go on indefinitely. The knowledge of the audience impressed Bae Sang-soo. Everything was going too smoothly, so he decided to ask them what the patron's purpose was. If there was a forest of hands for the previous questions, no one knew the answer to this one. Everyone just kept silent, waiting for a brave person to come up with a guess. Suddenly, the teacher's gaze was drawn to Lee Jun-kyung, who was sitting quietly, without even trying to answer anything. He asked for his answer to his question. It was obvious that he had no desire to be liked or to stand out. That's why I wanted to hear his opinion, because he acted as if he knew everything. Lee Jun-kyung suggested that the patrons were just having fun. His answer caused most of the audience to laugh. Such a thought seemed silly to everyone. Bae Sang-soo immediately broke out in a sweat, but he didn't expect to hear such an answer. He asked him to clarify what the hunter meant by entertainment. Then, he assumed the patrons were the people who chose the characters to pass the trials. It's just a pleasure for them, a game. The Demon King believed that the patrons regarded our world as a mere game in which they could find a player to exploit, and for that, he paid the price. The seminar had passed, and now it was time to practice. The girl chose a weapon in the form of a sword for the test. For the test mission, it was necessary to fight a goblin. But it didn't matter if she defeated him or not. The final decision was up to the teacher. After announcing that the goblin was brainwashed and incapable of sending anyone to the next world or injuring anyone, he announced the start of the test. It was a powerful start. The speed of the girl and the hungry goblin was simply unfathomable. The battle seemed promising. But it wasn't to be. She decided to perform a dangerous maneuver and turned away, delivering a crushing blow that meant the end for the goblin. The end of a successfully passed test. She earned praise from Bei Sang-soo himself, who was impressed with the way she managed to win. The last contestant was Lee Jun-kyung, who chose a spear and shield as his weapons. Even in the future, it is the best choice for him. He realized that to continue attending classes and avoid being kicked out of the association, he had to pass the test and prove himself. That has its advantages. Before starting, the teacher warned that all the goblins had run out, and the last hunter would have to fight another opponent. All that's needed is consent. A more formidable opponent, but just as brainwashed. As long as the B-rank hunter is around, nothing should have happened to anyone. Bei Sang-soo was impressed with his response to the seminar, so he had high stakes for this battle. With great pleasure, he announced the beginning. Expecting to see a kobold that was not much different from a goblin, he was shocked. In front of Lee Jun-kyung was a real orc. It was known that only C-rank hunters could defeat him because his strength was equal to that of 2 grown men. The rest of us just recoiled from the screen. The teacher explained that Lee Jun-kyung had awakened with a C-rank and had managed to defeat the enemies in the D-rank gate. That's why the rules were tightened. The orc decided to attack immediately without relying on any tactics. The hunter managed to hurt him by simply thrusting his spear in front of him. This action simply could not help but anger the orc, who did not hesitate to instantly grab the spear that flew at him. Lee Jun-kyung was very frightened when he realized that his spear was stuck in the orc and the orc was holding it. This caused a momentary panic as only the shield was left. The shield came in handy. He managed to repel a powerful enemy blow, which could have led to the complete defeat of the battle and a possible loss. While the others were frantically looking at the test, Bei Sang-soo was admiring it. Not everyone could overcome such a difficult opponent. The monster was much stronger than it seemed, having been slightly underestimated. The teacher was about to intervene, thinking that this was about to end badly. But Lee Jun-kyung's agility saved him from the orc's frantic attacks. He jumped from side to side, dodging each of his blows. Fury awakened in our hero, unleashing his fiery abilities and inflaming his shield to the point where his opponent's head just couldn't take it. The other hunters watching him through the screen were shocked, to say the least. They couldn't believe that he was just as new to the job as they were. Bei Sang-soo was puzzled as to how this was possible. A newly awakened hunter could not have such skills and could not cast spells. Lee Jun-kyung had increased his level and boosted his fire skills, but unfortunately, his shield strength had dropped to 0. The satisfied teacher looked at the hunter who had just passed the test, thinking that such a person was obliged to join their association. There was no admiration or joy on Lee Jun-kyung's face. He didn't fully realize what had happened because his strength had increased in the moment. All he cared about at that moment was that he had lost his weapon again. The power over fire was such a powerful skill that it was simply turning to ash. After class, he decided to meet Kim Soo-young and Yoo Sung-gu. He asked them to spend time together at his apartment. It was a housewarming party where they spent some time chatting and having a good time. Then he found out that Kim Soo-young had been appointed as his mentor. Yoo Sung-gu decided not to miss the moment to remind him of his offer to join their guild. He felt that this hunter was not something he should miss. There was a sense of tension at the table, as such an offer is very valuable, and refusing it could lead to further misunderstandings. What many people dream of and what Kim Soo-yeon was afraid of came to pass. Lee Jun-kyung decided not to join the best guild in Korea after all. This sparked a flurry of indignation among the leader. It seemed to him that there was no reason why one should voluntarily give up such a chance. After thinking it over, Lee Jun-kyung came to the conclusion that an early rapprochement with his former mentor could cause the future to change. But he promised them that he would come to their aid if they needed it. He was willing to help him until he repaid him for his rescue. To the inspector's surprise, they agreed, crossing their arms as if they had known each other for 100 years. Their demeanor was extraordinary, as if they were old friends. He was surprised that some newcomer would be able to help the guild leader. It was a great honor that hardly anyone had ever received before. That's how they spent the afternoon. They were incredibly comfortable with each other, as if that was how every evening went. Only the inspector didn't understand it yet. The next day, The hunters met outside the association, where Bei Sang-soo was waiting for them. He told them that the test would take place at the gate where he would take them. This news was a bit frightening for the newcomers, as they were expected to face something hazardous since they would need the help of a B-rank hunter. The task for the day was to collect all the supplies they had at the gate, and only then could they leave the portal. The first to enter the gate was Lee Jun-kyung, who instantly felt the viscosity of the air. The reason for this was because of the strong magic power. Once everyone had crossed the gate, the teacher instructed them to follow his directions. At the exact moment, strange sounds were heard. As you might expect, it was a mob of hungry goblins, eager to attack anyone entering the portal. Bei Sang-soo gave clear orders on who should go into battle and when. The first to go were numbers 1 and 3, who prepared their weapons. They deftly dealt with several goblins that were coming at them. They confidently swung their spears and threw the annoying monsters aside. Next in line were numbers 8 and 16. They certainly did not disappoint, and they completed their task. The next order caused everyone to look at each other. The teacher wanted to send one Lee Jun-kyung, who could do the task alone, to the battle. As one would expect, in a moment, hundreds of lifeless goblin bodies lay before the hunters. It was a phenomenal sight. One by one, he defeated his enemies, tossing them aside every now and then. He had already passed the stage of not requiring any special effort. It seemed simple only to him. The others were beginning to doubt for the umpteenth time that he was a novice and not an experienced hunter of high rank. Bei Sang-soo looked at him with the same thoughts, equating the newcomer to himself. He realized that such a genius could not be missed. Then they continued on their way as if nothing had happened. Their main goal was to find supplies, so there was no time to stop and waste. Bei Sang-soo immediately warned them that they would soon reach the boss, so one must always be wary. Before the primary battle for the day, they needed to check their weapons and drink a special potion. Meanwhile, Lee Jun-kyung analyzed the Demon King's actions and realized that his main mistake was quickly pumping up his skills. He decided that his main goal was to achieve the power to defeat the 12 gods of Eden as soon as possible. As I walked a little farther, the air began to thicken, more and more. It was as if the color of the air began to change. One could feel an incredible power enveloping the area, a magic that was capable of absorbing the main force entering. The order was given to retreat and return immediately to the gate. The hunters were in danger. Bei Sang-soo didn't have time to retreat before fire tentacles flew at them, and there was no way to dodge them. The venomous fangs of a particular creature caught up with the teacher. As he tried to resist it, he suddenly felt relieved. It was as if the monster had retreated. A sudden, fiery explosion. Already looking from Bei Sang-soo's side, he realized that it was impossible to survive such an attack. Something reflected the blow. Turning around at the new recruits, he saw Lee Jun-kyung with his shield capable of repelling even such an attack. He simply had no words to express his admiration for his actions and strength. Lee Jun-kyung had a different opinion. He was sure that the main force had been repelled by the teacher, and he was left with little else to do. Suddenly, a goblin sorcerer appeared in front of them. The young hunter had no choice but to confront him, for he had been given an order from a fallen angel. The crowd of hunters was frightened because the goblin sorcerer could easily handle a B-rank hunter they couldn't handle. Ready for battle, Bei Sang-soo sent all the newcomers out of the portal and summoned the association for help. Even the teacher wasn't entirely confident in his own strength. Suddenly, Lee Jun-kyung volunteered for the battle against the goblin sorcerer. He felt his duty to the fallen angel. The teacher tried to ground him by explaining that this monster was not as simple as the previous ones. Its abilities are based on magic, not physical strength. However, Lee Jun-kyung, demonstrating his knowledge of this opponent, stated that he knew how he could be defeated. He also decided to catch the teacher by saying that according to the rules, the monsters in this gate should be able to be handled by every beginner. They can. As expected, the sorcerer began to attack with fireballs of fire tentacles. Lee Jun-kyung's shield was able to withstand it. One by one, he deflected the fiery lightning bolts aimed at him. It wasn't the most fantastic thing he could do. The other rookies couldn't believe their eyes. Reflecting fireballs was beyond the ability of an ordinary novice of their rank. Bei Sang-soo was no less surprised to notice that he didn't reflect the fireballs, but managed to absorb them. Even to him, this action was a mystery. Heading at the sorcerer with incredible speed and aiming his spear at him, Lee Jun-kyung already seemed to have won, but no. The sorcerer created a shield around himself and surrounded all the hunters with fire, trapping them in a magical trap from which they could not escape. The newcomers began to panic when they saw how confused Li Junqiang was. Then they decided that they had no more chances. But it wasn't to be. When he cast the spell, he achieved something that absolutely no one present had expected. Even the sorcerer wasn't prepared for it. Magically, the circle of fire dissolved, as if opening a passage for Li Junqiang to pass directly to his opponent. It seemed like something out of the realm of the impossible. Controlling fire was an incredible skill that even the teacher himself did not possess. Now that there was no obstacle in the form of fire in his way, he could safely reach his enemy. He had all his trump cards. Realizing this, the goblin sorcerer began frantically trying to think of something else. He had to conjure something to prevent the hunter from reaching him. But he didn't have time. He gathered all his power into his fiery spear. He squinted his eyes at the enemy, overpowering him so that the flaming parts shrouded the ground around him. Applause and enthusiastic voices could be heard behind him. Having accomplished his mission, he became a super rookie among his peers. But it wasn't the joy of his colleagues that soothed him. It was the fact that the fallen angel had become his true patron from that moment on, giving him a new skill, summoning a familiar. In the evening, Bei Sang-su decided to report this incident to the association's president himself. Such a phenomenon could not be ignored. Without listening to what his teacher was trying to tell him, he was afraid to assume that Li Junqiang was a hunter of a lower rank than they thought. But when he found out the exact opposite of the actual reason for Bei Sang-su's visit, his mood immediately lifted. This was a fundamental change in the case. He decided to ask how much potential the teacher thought Li Junqiang had. He said with confidence in his voice that the goal to which the president aspired was quite achievable thanks to the young hunter. From that moment on, the president's desire to see the hunter about whom there had been so much talk lately only grew stronger. In the morning, Li Junqiang met with Kim Soo-young and Yu Seong-gu. The leader was interested in whether or not he had received an invitation to join the association. He remembered the day when they had come out of the gate. In front of everyone, he had been offered a very lucrative position to join the association. Then he refused. He had his reasons. If he joined the association, he would have no opportunity to hide his true intentions and powers. Meanwhile, tired of waiting for Li Junqiang's answer, the leader started asking him unrelated questions about his food preferences. This made him stupefied. In fact, it was an unconventional suggestion to go get something to eat. Foolishly, they headed for the diner. After the meeting, Li Junqiang decided to take a shower while gradually immersing himself in his own thoughts, which kept him busy. Remembering all his battles, he decided to check his status update. He was amazed that he now could summon a familiar. He was curious to know if he had the same abilities as the Demon King. Did that mean his familiars would be just as good as his? After gathering his thoughts and having only one chance, he decided to test his new skill and try to summon a familiar. His body felt as if it was infused with power. The next morning, an inspector came to his apartment with the happy news that he was the talk of the town. All the networks were filled with his persona, but Li Junqiang wasn't happy about the news at all. As he wondered how he had managed to defeat the sorcerer, he thought about something else. Did getting on the front page but not divulging his personal information means that he wasn't already known anywhere else? Kim Soo-yeon was wary of the hunter's reaction. He was expecting positive emotions because he was a rookie hunter who managed to get on the main news page. Suddenly, Li Junqiang gave out something the inspector didn't expect to hear. He expressed his intention to participate in the dungeon cleanup, and so his will was accomplished in an instant. Already that day, he managed to get into the gate and defeat hundreds of goblins. After defeating countless monsters, he received a notification that his level had increased. It wasn't enough for him. He just stared at his bracelet, waiting for his familiars to show up. He had no idea what it would take. The hundreds of souls he'd sent to the afterlife weren't enough for the devourer. Perhaps the familiar was so powerful that it wasn't enough. And then the thought struck him that it wasn't about monster souls, that his mistake had been misinterpreting what was required. After another sweep, Li Junqiang walked out of the gate where Kim Soo-young was already waiting for him with his congratulations. After his fourth raid, the inspector came for the items that Li Junqiang was willing to auction off. After taking all of his inventory of swords, Kim Soo-young informed him that after the sale, the money earned from the auction would be deposited into his account. The only question that interested Li Junqiang at that time was when he would be able to enter the next gate. And unfortunately for him, there are no more gates left. As it turned out, a new guild had formed that reserved over 20 low-level portals. He was amazed at how one poor guild could cover so many gates, albeit low-level ones. Until recently, such requests were automatically denied, but since all the gates they had previously reserved had been cleared, there was no other option. Lee Jun-kyung shuddered when he assumed that the head of that very guild was Choi Young-sung, and unfortunately, his fears were confirmed. It was about the Northern Army Guild, which was founded by a former super rookie. He realized exactly who he was talking about. It was the hunter who would become a subordinate of the 12 gods in the future, the most ruthless killer and tyrant Earth has ever seen, or rather, who it has yet to see. Choi Young-sun was a rioter according to the people. He destroyed the houses of civilians and started building on them. He thought they were just ordinary ants, but he thought they were capable of building their own homes again. It seemed to him that even if they kept some slaves alive, they would still find a reason to revolt. So he saw no cause for concern. Lee Jun-kyung remembered the monster that destroyed his village where he was born, wiped out half of its population. Suddenly, he heard a man screaming. Among his grandfather's outrages were mentions of hunters who were doing something outrageous. One of them was just kicking the bike with a smirk on his face. The shouting clearly gave him pleasure, so he kept kicking even harder. Grandpa couldn't take it anymore and just begged for it to stop. All he wanted was to be left alone. Lee Jun-kyung couldn't get past the crying man who clearly needed help. The hunters were not in a good mood. Such conclusions could be drawn from their rough speech and unwillingness to stop. Lee Jun-kyung couldn't stand it anymore and started talking to them in the same language they could understand better. He realized that there was no way to avoid conflict. One of them went straight to personalities, calling Lee Jun-kyung something he was not, thus showing that he was not to be spoken to in that manner. They could tell by the look in their eyes that it was a hunter. No doubt it frightened them, for they could only hurt those who were weaker than they were. Thinking that he had succeeded in subduing the hunters, Lee Jun-kyung turned to his grandfather and asked what had happened. Suddenly, one of the bullies decided to speak without letting the victim finish. He complained that his grandfather had scratched him with his cart. It was clear from the man's cries that they were lying. They were the first to jump on him and started kicking his cart, beating him in the process. Perplexed as to what they really wanted from the unfortunate man, he questioned what they had broken his cart for. Their only argument was that every hunter who felt threatened by someone automatically considered them an enemy, and an attack even more so. Gradually, the hunter brought up the fact that if Lee Jun-kyung didn't get away from them, they would take it as a threat to him. However, Lee Jun-kyung made it seem like they weren't the ones letting him leave peacefully, but rather he was letting them go. Such a statement simply enraged one of them. Enraged, he threw himself at the young man, but he obviously didn't know who he was up against. Immediately, Lee Jun-kyung clamped his arm, thus preventing him from hurting himself. Then, thanks to his extraordinary strength, he easily threw the boy behind his back. With a face full of calm, he began to move away from him. The second hunter was waiting for him. Unlike the first hunter, he decided to use his sword to defeat his opponent for sure. Lee Jun-kyung realized that he was afraid of him. The bully knew that he was not a member of any guild, so he had nothing to lose by pulling out a weapon. And since he decided to attack by calling Lee Jun-kyung trash and elevating himself above him, he decided to just strike back, which literally knocked him out. As he looked at the hunters lying amongst the debris, he would make sarcastic jokes about them. A little while later, the association arrived to arrest the hunters, who were very unhappy with their detention, and Lee Jun-kyung was thanked for his kindness. As a hunter, he didn't pass by. Instead, he helped the poor man. Kim Soo-young was glad that he had proved himself. He knew they would be severely punished for such a crime, especially since there was a witness. Realizing that Lee Jun-kyung was now thinking about the safety of the injured man, he hurriedly reassured him. He believed that Grandpa was safe. The guild won't be able to take revenge on him because the association will be watching him. However, the primary concern for Lee Jun-kyung was which guild the bullies belonged to. Where was there such a cruel place where such behavior was normal? And that's when the puzzle came together. They belonged to the same Northern Army that was mentioned earlier. It was impossible to secure all the low-level gate contracts without utilizing your people within the association. He just resented the fact that they were acting in the open without trying to hide the fact that they had some sort of rat in their association. Predictably, a few days later, the victim changed his testimony. The attackers became innocent, and the savior turned into a criminal. Even though Lee Jun-kyung knew about the outcome, he was still worried. But Kim Soo-yeon didn't let him get discouraged and reassured him that everything would be fine anyway. The inspector was not yet as disillusioned with the association as Lee Jun-kyung, who was already realizing from the future how rotten this society was. And finally, they came to the Hunters Association to be interrogated, answering all the questions the association was interested in. He was clearly pressured during the interrogation. It was made to look as if he had reported the hunters on purpose to divert suspicion away from himself. Of course, Lee Jun-kyung didn't agree that he had perjured himself. He continued to claim that the guild members were playing foul. Then, the victim entered the room. It was his words that were of great importance, for he was the only one who knew who had attacked him. The question posed by the association was originally constructed so that the correct answer was already hidden within it, and the old man only had to confirm it. Sweat rolled down Lee Mong-soo's face, and he didn't know what to say. He realized that he was framing an innocent man anyway. But Lee Jun-kyung hurriedly calmed him down and said that he had nothing to worry about, even though he knew he was being blackmailed. Unable to even raise his eyes to look at his savior, Lee Moon-soo confirmed that the attacker was right in front of him. The satisfied association representative thanked Grandpa for his false testimony. After all, it was exactly what they needed to hear. He left the room with his head bowed low. He probably had doubts about whether he had done the right thing, but he had no choice. With a sarcastic smile, the man conducting the interrogation expected to hear some arguments that he was not guilty, although he realized that everything was already decided. Lee Jun-kyung didn't have any verbal proof, but he had something more important. A cell phone that recorded the entire incident verbatim. An unequivocal victory that can destroy anyone. No argument is necessary in such a case. The footage of the incident speaks for itself. After leaving the association, he realized that they were aware of the false testimony and had taken no action about it, but Lee Mong-soo would be in trouble. Along the way, he ran into Sung-gu, who was already aware of everything that had happened and was clearly not pleased. Kim Soo-young admitted that he had to call the association leader just in case. It was the only influential contact he had. Not wanting to distract them, Lee Jun-kyung hinted that he could go on ahead in case they had important things to do, and he didn't forget to thank them. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Lee Moon-soo. He crawled to Lee Jun-kyung on his knees to beg for forgiveness. With tears in his eyes, he shared that he had been threatened. His granddaughter could have been hurt, which he simply could not allow. Kim Soo-young was outraged that the Northern Army Guild had stooped to such an unforgivable act. Before, Lee Mong-soo couldn't admit it because his granddaughter was still in danger, but now he had no choice but to apologize. Sung-gu calmed the kneeling grandfather by promising him that he and his granddaughter would be fine. Having been forgiven and assured of complete safety, Grandpa was able to leave with a clear conscience. Fortunately, Lee Jun-kyung developed the habit of videotaping everything, as the outcome would have been different otherwise. You had to keep an eye on what was going on here. Suddenly, a figure familiar to Lee Jun-kyung appeared nearby. It was heading clearly towards them. Choi Young-sun approached them immediately, noting that the head of one of the largest guilds was standing with a super rookie in the same company for a reason. Kim Soo-yeon thought that the rat from the association belonged to him. Otherwise, how else can you explain the fact that he was aware of all the events? Meanwhile, the guild leader of the Northern Army Guild decided to introduce himself to his interlocutor by shaking his hand. He reciprocated with one butt. With a warning, Sung-gu shook his hand. He said that being so arrogant would make enemies of the guild leader and the super rookie. He was puzzled to hear such words. It was a clear threat on their part, and he immediately snatched his hand away from that firm shake. But Sung-gu continued to use his own weapons. He said that he was nothing compared to them. He told him to be careful because there was danger around. Later, they went to a coffee shop where Kim Soo-young decided to speak out about the injustice of the association, which had only given the offenders a ticket. This behavior of the association didn't surprise Lee Jun-kyung at all because, in the future, hunters were untouchable. He was more concerned about what happened to Lee Mong-soo. Perjury to a hunter was a felony, and luckily, the video was able to prove their guilt. Lee Mong-soo was simply released with a warning. Hearing that the Northern Army had quieted down after this incident made Lee Jun-kyung suspicious. He sensed that a cold-blooded criminal wouldn't give up so easily. He asked the inspector to continue monitoring every action of the Army of the North, fearing that their leader would one day catch up with him. Lee Jun-kyung promised himself not to sit idly by. He knew that there would be retribution for the destruction of the village. The next day, he arranged for Sung-gu to go to a higher-ranked gate together. He trusted him so much that he had his support. And, of course, he could not refuse because he had the pleasure of fighting alongside such a genius. The guys from the same guild were delighted that they got to watch the battle of the super rookie himself, who they had heard a lot about. They were sprinkling compliments on Lee Junkyung every now and then, making him feel uncomfortable. It was unusual for him to receive so much attention. These two were the same guild members who had once rescued Lee Junkyung from the gate after a battle with goblins. And so, Lee Junkyung, along with the guild members, were already ready to enter the C-rank gate. The first in line was, of course, Sung-gu, since he was in charge of the super rookie, followed by everyone else. Meanwhile, in the Guild of the Army of the North, there was a furious argument over the way forward after such a humiliating failure. Deputy Guild Head Choi Yong-soo was infinitely angered that they had retreated so easily. After all, they had just begun to expand their field of influence. Jung and Chang shut him up by stating the need to increase their influence in the territories they already owned before conquering others. He made it clear that the recent actions committed by their guild members were unacceptable and simply out of control. Choi Yong-soo disagreed with him. He thought humans were cockroaches, undeserving of an apology, who only continued to live because of the hunters. A spark slipped between the two of them. They were about to go outside the guild and settle their dispute physically rather than verbally. Their disagreement was interrupted by Young's son. He shouted at both of them to shut up. He said that Young-soo was right, and he thought they should be punished. Ying-chang wanted to be indignant and disagree, but in this situation, his opinion was clearly unnecessary. It had already been decided. Young's son realized who he was talking about and agreed with his deputy, so he asked them to refrain from arguing. The stage was about to be set, and they only had to wait for the signal to be given. In the Army of the North, defeat was unacceptable. Meanwhile, at the gate, one of Song-gu's guild members had already checked the ground for traps and eliminated them by signaling her guys. Then they followed each other in a chain and set off to further explore the area, hoping to stumble upon monsters. Suddenly, spears flew out from afar. Someone was already waiting for them and ready to attack. One of the guild members used his skill to create a shield from the earth itself. He only needed to cast a special spell. The other used a shield of fire to fend off spears flying from all sides. Junkyung was impressed. He was excited that one day he would also possess these skills, especially since he had seen them in a real battle. Sung-gu then joined in, using fire lightning against the goblins rushing towards his men. He managed to scatter them to the sides with a single strike. This made the goblins even angrier, and unable to stop themselves, they continued to attack until their entire army fell. After the fight, he inquired directly of Junkyung, thinking that the real purpose of their visit was just to show him their skills and abilities. It was true. He was so enamored of their power in words that he wanted to see what they were like in action. And that's what he got to see. One of the guild members mentioned that they would also like to see what the super rookie that had been talked about so much everywhere was capable of. And he didn't mind at all. A new batch of goblins had just arrived, eager to avenge their own. The goblins came from everywhere, not knowing or fully understanding what awaited them. Gathering all their weapons, they rushed into battle. Silently, Lee Junkyung managed to activate the fire on his spear. Then he was able to put down the entire army with practically one swing. The guild, on the other hand, was shocked by the skills of a newcomer who had only studied high-level skills and had already learned how to use them without words. Just goblins flying in all directions, or rather just parts of them. With dexterity, he separated their arms, depriving them of the opportunity to fight. When the dungeon was cleared of goblins, they came out of the gate discussing what had happened. Everyone shared their impressions. The fun didn't last long. The head of the guild was immediately condemned for foolishness and for hiding such a talent that needed to be recruited immediately. Without wasting time, Song-gu reminded Lee Junkyung of his offer to join their guild again. All the more reason for him to see their power for himself. He realized that Song-gu saw something in him that the others didn't. He could sense his inner nature and abilities. He had never seen such skills before. The guild leader knew that the Northern Army would not rest and would come to Lee Junkyung, so he offered to join them. He would be 100% safe with them. Moreover, he made a surprising proposal to him, to join the guild by taking his place, to join them immediately as their head. The guild was more shocked than Lee Junkyung. The news was so surprising to them since no one had ever encountered such a thing before. As much as he didn't want to accept it, even though it was enough for him to remain a regular deputy, he refused. It was too early for him to get close to Sung-gu. But the guild leader wasn't upset by his refusal. he understood. He knew he had his own intentions far grander than this. Suddenly, he received a notification on his phone that the Hunters Association needed his help, as well as the assistance of hundreds of hunters in the Army of the North. Sungu thought this seemed suspicious. The Army of the North was the largest guild currently in existence. It was unclear for what purpose they needed help. The concerns seemed quite real already. Choi Young-sun was using the association for his own purposes, and they definitely needed his help. Meanwhile, Jung In-chang was in the association building, sitting on a comfortable chair. A message was sent to him from the association's phone. He thought back to when Choi Young-sun and Choi Young-soo were still friends. They weren't so cruel. Times have changed, and so have they. He changed everyone. They stopped respecting people and were willing to remove the hunters who undermined the guild's authority. Ying Chang was torn between morality and friendship. When the invited guest finally appeared in the association, Ying Chang was not prepared to be ceremonious with him. However, the fact that he came alone embarrassed him. As strange as it was, he decided to help Jung Kyung and asked him to reject the message he received about mobilizing hunters. But the latter was quite surprised at such a proposal, because it seemed that he was supposed to be on the side of the enemies and help them. The Northern Army Guild was just as likely to mobilize as the hunters from the association. It could only mean a battle. Ying Chang decided to warn the young hunter, explaining that hunters are more cruel than they appear, especially the guild leader of the Northern Army. For all his warnings of danger, Lee Jung-kyung only chuckled, saying that if their head is such a dangerous man on the street and in the gate, this could mean that they were not worthy of the title of the Army of the North, and the only name that suited them was the Chaos Guild, where the leader was a tyrant. Using the knowledge from the book, he described the existence of Chaos Guilds, where the patrons of the hunters were devils, assigning them cruel tasks. Yong. In Chang's indignation at this statement was unprecedented. He couldn't believe his ears that their guild was dared to be equated with such despots. Lee Jun-kyung caught him saying that those were just paraphrased words of his opponent. If he disagreed with them, then there was nothing to be afraid of. He kept pissing him off by reminding him who they really were. In the future, he already knew who the Army of the North was, and how brutal it was. Unable to endure such insolence, Ying Chang grabbed his sword. He didn't want to wait for a battle. He decided to end it immediately. But Lee Jun-kyung didn't consider his words to be an insult to their guild. It was just dry facts that they should have realized long ago. He was trying to convey to his opponent that his friends were not the children he knew. The Army of the North is rotten to the bone, along with its leader and deputy. Chang's only thought at this moment was that they had miscalculated how strong he was. He was a much stronger opponent who could read between the lines. Looking at him, he couldn't imagine who was really in front of him. He knew all their actions in advance. He even knew that he existed. Jung In-chang himself was no ordinary deputy leader of the Northern Army. He was called Siegfried the Dragon Slayer, Immortal Siegfried. It was he who managed to fight the most vile monster of the Demon King. He was victorious and received immortality from his patron. In the next battle with the Demon King, at the behest of Choi Young-sun, he was defeated at the hands of his close friend, Choi Young-soo. After learning the truth, Lee Jun-kyung realized how hard it was for him to be around such cruel people. He believed that In-chang wasn't like that. He wanted to join forces with him. He had strength and special skills, but he was the only thing that kept the Army of the North together. His moral principles, lurking somewhere in the depths of his soul, attracted Lee Jun-kyung. Their paths parted temporarily. Jun-kyung continued to do his job of clearing the dungeons of monsters. Another victory was the land of the dead. And after this triumph, his weapon failed again. His power over fire was too mighty for the spear to contain. Then he realized that they would never get anywhere with those weapons. Before mobilizing, he needed to equip the hunters with good equipment. As if he were in a medieval forge, he headed for a master craftsman capable of making the most potent weapons he could find. Even though he wasn't pleased to see him, he was so busy and not expecting visitors that he didn't even bother to look at the guests. Lee Jun-kyung looked at him with admiration, hoping never to meet a true dwarf. He chose his path right after waking up. He looked at the man who had worked hard to create something super unique. For something like this, it was worth the wait. It was only 4 hours later that Park Jae-hyun finally got free. He was surprised to see Lee Jun-kyung because he had already forgotten about the unexpected guest. It was funny that the blacksmith decided to ask who was in front of him after a few hours of being there. He needed a weapon from the blacksmith badly enough. Park Jae-hyun was so surprised that a nameless blacksmith someone decided to approach him. It was a great honor for him. Seeing someone's blacksmith's hammer hanging on the wall behind the blacksmith, Lee Jun-kyung began to wonder if he was the only one there or if there were other masters. Indeed, behind Park Jae-hyun was a giant hammer that clearly belonged to a very famous blacksmith. It would be beneficial. But the blacksmith decided not to mention the name of the guy to whom the hammer belonged. The blacksmith agreed not to mention the name of the guy who owned the hammer. Lee Jun-kyung shared that he had received orders from his patron to go to this particular forge. Park Jae-kyung was amazed that he was a hunter who contacted his patron directly. He had never encountered such a thing before, but Lee Jun-kyung knew that the blacksmith had no choice. He was just as dependent on his patron, who interfered directly into his life time and time again. A blacksmith named Park Jae-hyun was mentioned in the Demon King's autobiography. Moreover, he was the one who equipped him with weapons. The book also said that over time, the blacksmith began to supply weapons only to the 12 gods. If he hadn't changed sides, the story would have been different. Park Jae-hyun agreed with him. He had no reason not to trust him, but he couldn't make a special weapon for him. He explained that he was not very good with fire, and without this skill, it was impossible to create weapons. That's why he was unknown and had never taken orders before. Realizing that they could help each other a lot, Lee Jun-kyung reached out his hand to the blacksmith. This way, he decided to make a deal with him. There was a look of bewilderment in the blacksmith's eyes. He just didn't understand what was required of him. Jun-kyung promised to give him the flame he needed for his work. A small flame formed on Lee Jun-kyung's outstretched arm. In order not to scare the blacksmith, he spoke about his ability to control fire. It looked like a joke from the outside. The blacksmith had never met anyone with this ability before, so he didn't really believe it was possible. But when the color of the flame changed to blue, he was speechless. It was beyond the boundaries of reality and could not help but frighten the ordinary blacksmith. Opening his mouth wide, he continued to watch as the flames moved smoothly in the hunter's hands. He really could control the fire with dexterity. Lee Jun-kyung could not just control it, he could subdue it and consume it. Everything that had to do with fire was his element. The way he handled the fire couldn't help but convince the blacksmith to get to work. A week later, the blacksmith managed to recreate the magnificent weapon he would create for the 12 gods in the future. But right now, it was in Lee Jun-kyung's hands. When he saw it, he couldn't look at it. It was hard to realize that in his hands was the thing that made the demon god fight and the thing that made him disappear. Park Jae-hyun shared that he was able to incorporate the fire control ability into the spear. But it's not enough for one blacksmith to create a shield. It's too much work. As unpleasant as it was to realize, the spear was all this blacksmith was capable of. It was as if he didn't know that this creation already deserved praise. Lee Jun-kyung didn't blame him for not being able to create a shield. He knew that to create something bigger, he needed the intervention of a patron. He knew some weapons could be upgraded over time. If he had one, he wouldn't have to change it all the time. After learning that the spear was still unfinished, Lee Jun-kyung was amazed. He considered this masterpiece to be a fully fledged weapon, ready for battle. In order for the spear not to remain at a low level, it needed to be pumped. For that, another person was required. Lee Jun-kyung would have to come back. He bowed and thanked the blacksmith and hurried away. He knew that the blacksmith knew what was best and would do what was necessary. Suddenly, the blacksmith's gaze caught the bracelet on Lee Jun-kyung's arm. He was scared out of his mind because he knew what it was for. He assumed that this bracelet was inherited from his patron. It made sense that he was definitely from a lineage of some unique patrons. The blacksmith's words that this thing should be gotten rid of and that it wouldn't do any good alerted Jun-kyung, though he didn't change his mind. He believed that as long as he was a member of the hunter mobilization, he would not be able to activate the familiars, and this bracelet would remain unused. But what he had accomplished so far was beyond his expectations. He'd managed to get his hands on the Demon King's own weapon. He was sure that if Jung In-chang came to his side, they would have a better chance of winning. He only had 2 weeks to mobilize. Lee Jun-kyung decided to practice his new weapon and try it out. He went to the portal to fight the goblins again. As he fought the monsters, he realized that 2 weeks would not be enough for him. To fully develop his skill, he needed to eliminate sleep. 2 weeks later, Choi Young-sun announced to his hunters that everything was ready for battle. They could advance. The day had come when the army of the North decided to remind itself of its existence and finally emerge from the shadows by subjugating other territories. The satisfied guild members shrieked words of praise. They were driven to glorify their guild of the Army of the North throughout Korea. Confidently, the guild leader stood on the pedestal, satisfied with how he had managed to charge his army. This was what he had been working towards for so many years. Choi Young-sun became a true A-rank hunter who could shake the world. He was ready to remind everyone who the Army of the North was. He was not alone. He had the support of his members everywhere, guild members. With their support, he was 100% confident of his victory. His main goal was to become king, to become a world-famous person who would be obeyed by every hunter. Meanwhile, Kim Soo-young tried to dissuade Lee Jun-kyung from joining the battle with the Army of the North. According to him, they were more vicious than they seemed. In addition, the guild that had last opposed the Army of the North had been defeated to the ground. Now, it could only be talked about. Suddenly, they saw something on the road that confused Kim Soo-young. It was the handiwork of the North's army. There was no doubt about it. Soo-young lost his balance on the road and became confused, unable to control the car, which caused an accident. He slumped against the steering wheel, barely containing his emotions. They'd almost died, and it was all the fault of one guild. Unable to control his rage, he reminded Lee Jun-kyung of who he wanted to go up against. He was too important a person for the association to take such a risk. For all his pleas not to go there, Jun-kyung decided to answer in his own words. Nothing is more important than his own life. Hoping that he had managed to talk some sense into the hunter, he glanced at him, confirming what he had said earlier. He believed it would help. Lee Jun-kyung was well aware of the value of his life. He promised not to take part in the mobilization, hoping for the best. His plan was to make his opponents recognize the fact that life is the most precious thing a person can have. What baffled everyone on the road, and every person passing by, was a portal forming right over the ocean. In honor of such a sensational event, journalists gathered everywhere. They were happy to inform the people about the current news directly from the scene. Lee Jun-kyung met up with Sung-gu, wondering what he was doing there. After all, the Major League Guild refused to participate in the raid, but he made it clear that he would not leave his friend in the lurch. He could not miss the opportunity to fight his enemy in the form of the leader of the Northern Army. The look on his face pissed Sung-gu off. As soon as he thought back to the day he met him, he was filled with hatred and a desire for revenge. He also realized that even if he asked Lee Jun-kyung not to go there, he definitely wouldn't listen to him, so he didn't even try. Lee Jun-kyung was not stupid either and knew what they were there for. Everyone wanted to stop the villain and bring back world peace. Sung-gu said that the leader of the North's army is much stronger than he looks. His official rank on the registration is B. Although both of them could perfectly sense that their opponent's rank had peaked, he had become stronger. The Supreme Guild leader believed that the super rookie had some kind of brilliant plan. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone about this matter with such confidence. He gave his word to stay on the bench and wait for Lee Jun-kyung to return. He knew that if he didn't come out of the gate, his revenge would be terrible. As soon as they had finished, the raid was announced. Everyone was asked to finish their preparations and assemble. Choi Young-soo believed that their victory would be unconditional. He would become the hero Gunther, and the Rhine River Gate would take thousands of souls with it. But Lee Jun-kyung knew that this was a moment in history that he could change. This was his chance to save the planet. As he reached the gates of the Rhine River, he felt that his moment of glory had arrived. He would emerge victorious. After receiving the message that the characteristics of this gate had changed, the hunters tensed up. No one had ever received such a message before. Not only was the gate upgraded from B rank to B+, but the ability to leave the gate was blocked. They have no choice but to win. Due to the vast number of awakened people, the patrons' attention was focused on this place, and the density of magic power was increasing with each passing second. What many had feared had happened. The rank of the gate reached the highest possible level, A. None of the hunters were prepared for such a turn. The hunters are starting to lose their composure. The gate cannot be cleared without a hunter of heroic rank. There were none among them. Many of them panicked, begging to be let out of that gate. No one had any hope of surviving in such conditions, and that was not surprising. They'd grab their heads and get hysterical. The task seemed impossible to them all. The day had come when perhaps their end had come. Watching all this chaos, Lee Jun-kyung was not surprised. He understood the hunter's reluctance to die so soon. Everything went according to Choi Young-sun's plan. He and his brother watched the scene. They knew they were doing the right thing to win. He ordered the hunters to calm down. He acted as if he didn't know what was going on, citing the fact that the gate had not been fully explored. He gave hope to the people, telling them not to despair. He was ready to help them in the cleanup, fighting alongside all those standing there. Having gained the power of the ruler of the current, thanks to which any orders do not go unheeded, he forbade his hunters to advance. According to him, the wave of this gate was going to last for a very long time. The guild forces of the Northern Army had to be kept at maximum strength. Young Sun's plan was to take out the battle at the expense of the hunters of other guilds. Then, they would be able to save their strength by supposedly winning. Those are the heroes. Young Su disagreed with this plan. He knew that the hunters would start guessing as soon as they saw that the Northern Army was not participating in the battle. But the leader insisted. To avert all suspicion, he was willing to sacrifice his less essential people. His gaze crossed with Lee Jun-kyung, who knew for sure what they were talking about. He was the one who had the best chance of standing up to these people. That look frightened Young Sun. He suspected that he was guessing their decision. Therefore, he intended to eliminate this opponent. He called his deputy, Jung In-yang, to bring his idea to life. He was ready to give him the job of eliminating someone who could disrupt his plans. He hadn't shared his thoughts with his deputy lately. He trusted him, but not to this extent. But he could trust him to send his enemy to the other side. By ordering him to keep watching Lee Jun-kyung, he allowed him to take his life if possible. With a small caveat, he mentioned that such actions would be best for the Army of the North that wanted to expand its capabilities. Even though Ying Chang was against this policy, he accepted his order. Then, he went to observe his opponent. Meanwhile, the hunters were terrified when they received word that the wave was approaching. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. Out of the water began to emerge mermen, creepy, strong creatures with long claw-like appendages. This monster was already familiar to the hunters. When they saw it, they exhaled, thinking that the A-Rang was not as dangerous as they had thought. Watching the hunters, Jun-kyung wondered how they could be so experienced, yet had forgotten about formation. Even low-level monsters could be dangerous. But how wrong they were to mistake these creatures for ordinary low-level creatures. They were characterized by the flames they spewed from their mouths. One by one, they demolished one by one with their fiery flames. The army of hunters that had just been advancing began to weaken. Lee Jun-kyung ordered them to take the wounded to the rear guard and maintain the formation. He decided to take matters into his own hands. Picking up the wounded hunters in their arms, the hunters ran for cover while the others tried to rally them into formation. There was no chance otherwise. While Lee Jun-kyung decided not to interfere in the battle, Young Sun gave orders to his army to destroy the enemy. Like mad, the guild members rushed at Merman. They didn't spare themselves. They just wanted to send the enemy to the other side and prove their power. As he watched, Jun-kyung was surprised that the Northern Army had already sent their men into battle. He had expected this moment to come later. They were able to sever body parts from their enemies with incredible dexterity. Like a killing machine, they would charge at the enemy, destroying everything in their path. The hunters couldn't just watch the Army of the North cope on its own. They definitely needed help and extra strength. They helped each other in battle. Some showed their healing skills by saving those who were injured by the monsters. Then, Lee Jun-kyung guessed that the lower members of the Northern Army had been sent into battle. They were used to cheer up the hunters. Tired of sitting on the sidelines, he decided that the hunters needed his help. He immediately armed himself with his spear and moved forward. Ying Chang stayed behind to watch him. He continued to watch the super rookie, waiting for the moment to attack. The words Lee Jun-kyung once said that his friends had changed long ago came to his mind. The Army of the North had long ago become rotten. He realized that if things continued like this, they would lose most of the North's army. Still, he didn't give up hope that the leader had some plan that would make it all end without casualties. The hunters watched the maneuvers of the super rookie with delight. They marveled at how he managed to do it since he was just an ordinary rookie. Using his fire shield and spear, he had no problem dealing with the merman. The hunters wondered how such a professional had gotten into the gate. And the strangest thing was that no one knew his name, even though they had heard of all the cool hunters. Even 10 days ago, they were of the same level, but through a lot of training, he managed to surpass himself. After finishing the sweep, Lee Jun-kyung, like many hunters, received many rewards from his patron. There was time to take a break. Thanks to his performance, he managed to attract the attention of several patrons, but the fallen angel was not satisfied. He was shattered, for doing his best only earned him the displeasure of his patron. He had no use for admiring hunters eager to know his name. Lee Jun-kyung was only thinking that he would still be able to win back the fallen angel's respect. After all, this isn't the only wave. For the hunters, he had orders to gather and be ready to fight monsters corresponding to Airang. Young Sun, standing on the rock and watching the hunters, was angry. Things were not going according to his plan. The hunters had managed to defeat the opponent on their own. After inquiring about his status, Lee Jun-kyung found that he had already reached the 24th level. This gate will help him get more. Level 30. Turning to the hunters, he already realized that they were his future. They would help him get through this together. The fourth wave of monsters was nothing special. Like the previous ones, it consisted of mere men that Lee Jun-kyung had already learned how to deal with. During the break, the hunters simply fell to the ground. Such a large number of sweeps in a day could exhaust anyone. Hearing the talk that their army had been reduced by 4 men, Lee Jun-kyung was disappointed. His plan was to leave the gate without a single casualty. Looking at the leaders of the Northern Army, he was indignant. He didn't understand the reason why, after 4 mopped-up waves, they still hadn't joined. His words hurt them. They didn't want to admit the fact that they just wanted to sit on the sidelines until a certain point, sacrificing the weak. Lee Jun-kyung couldn't hold it in anymore. He admitted that he was aware of their plan. He knew that they were aiming to keep their strength until the end. He urged them to fight and not sit back while other hunters sacrificed their lives for the good of all mankind. Young-soo felt the injustice to the others. The leader began to realize that his plan was falling apart when the army volunteered to fight. He now realized that the plan had come to an end. The low-level members of the Northern Army began to suspect something was amiss. Choi Young-sun felt cheated. He had acted for his own ends by using the leader's hands. It was very sneaky of him. Even though he knew there was no more plan, he failed. He decided to see what would happen next. After all, there was no turning back. He gloated, knowing that Lee Jun-kyung would one day run out of strength and he would be able to defeat him. Besides, he was sure that he was weaker than him. After another mopped-up wave, he showed up. The pre-final boss was a water golem. He was made entirely of water and was as tall as 50 hunters. A massive stream of water came out of his belly, capable of knocking anyone off their feet. The hunters jumped aside, dodging his water weapon. The flow of water from his body was so powerful that if he directed it upwards, it reached all the way to the sky. The hunters did not know how to react to such an enemy of impressive size. To them, its power seemed incredibly destructive. The shooters were not confused and decided to try to shoot arrows at the golem. In the hope that it would stop him, they launched arrows, one after another. But as you might expect, the arrows went right through without harming the boss. It seemed logical since he was made up of water. No spears were capable of destroying him. Even taking away his arm, as Lee Jun-kyung used to do, didn't help. He was just recovering. Since standard weapons didn't work, he decided to use fire weapons. Without a word, his spear and shield burst into flames. With all his might, he threw himself at the golem. The weapon was too rare not to cause any reaction from the pre-final boss. It worked. The Demon King's own spear turned the water golem into a sea. It disintegrated into tiny droplets that immediately mixed with the water. Everyone was shocked. Everyone saw how powerful this monster was, but the super rookie managed to deal with it. The unnamed hero. Lee Jun-kyung explained to them that their magic was useless primarily here. They had to use local magic and fill their weapons with mana. After hearing his advice, the guild girl, who was sure that only high-ranked hunters were capable of this, decided to give it a try. And it helped. When the golem recovered, they began to actively try new magic on it. However, Jun-kyung realized that with their level, they wouldn't be able to defeat it. He realized that the Muspelheim spear, which absorbed the flames, would save them. He had a plan of his own, which he devised by watching the golem's actions. To defeat him, it was necessary to destroy the core that held all of his magical power. The core from which all of this destructive power flowed. The hunters were about to retreat for fear of running into the golem's water stream again. They already knew the devastating effect it could have. Lee Jun-kyung heard a voice. It advised him to advance since the core had just been opened, and it was his only chance to end everything. Right in the heart of the golem, a huge hole was formed that could swallow everything around it. Lee Jun-kyung didn't miss this opportunity to defeat the boss. He aimed his spear at the place where the golem had all its magic coming from. With its magical powers gone, it simply disintegrated. He also managed to discover a new ability. Now, his spear could return to him without any effort, like a boomerang. Very convenient. It was only after many trials that the hunters remembered who was in front of them. They had heard of the super newcomer before, but had never seen him before. They were glad as they felt the support of the A-rank hunter. Now, they believed that they had a chance for salvation. And all he was happy about was the thought that he had once again received several honors and the opportunity to have several patrons at the same time. Though he managed to make the fallen angel smile again after the thought of a few patrons, all immediately turned away from him. Young Sun couldn't understand how a super rookie could rise above B rank in such a short period. It was unbelievable. He also allowed for one terrifying thing. He could be not just higher than B rank, but had already reached A rank, which seemed impossible. Yingchang pleaded with the head to take action. He began to suspect that everything that had happened had long ago gotten out of hand and was not part of their plans. The leader was not pleased with the words of his deputy. He was disappointed that those close to him were so unsure of his abilities. In the end, he suggested that he surrender, or rather, to admit defeat and end the long-awaited struggle. Young Sun became furious upon hearing this. He wasn't willing to stop and surrender to some hunter. This was not the purpose of such a long journey. He announced to his army that it was time to fully participate in the gate sweep. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. From below came the joyous shouts of whistling. The people were eager to prove themselves and show the hunters what they could do. Young Sun, thinking he was the future king, was not going to back down. He had to go all the way. No king would allow his pride to be trampled. He turned around and saw his deputy's helmet on the ground. He gestured that he was no longer on his side and would no longer support his movement. He remembered the day he appointed this man as his deputy. He had given him a helmet to make it easier for him to control the army of the north. Enraged, he kicked the helmet lying on the ground. He took it as a challenge when the dog dared to let loose and bite his master, bite the hand that gave him life. By announcing his resignation from the guild, he automatically turned the army of the north against him. The hour of vengeance was at hand. Meanwhile, the members of the northern army fought the mermen with self-satisfaction, boasting about their own strength. And then Li Junqiong came into play. The forces of the army of the north were nowhere near his equal in strength. The hunters were proud that he was on their side, and a newcomer was their advantage. Using his fire weapon, he demolished one by one. With so many waves cleared, it was a familiar action for him. When he stopped to catch his breath, he received a notification that his level had increased again. With this endless stream of monsters, it is no wonder, as he stood and pondered the fact that his strength was regenerating from the battles instead of being lost. Behind him stood a merman ready to attack. But the warning saved him. He heard a shout that someone was behind him, so he reacted in time to deflect the blow. In front of him stood Yung Ying Chang. All this time, underneath the mask of a formidable man, was a beautiful fighting lady. After realizing who was in front of him, Li Junqiong immediately decided to distance himself. In a second, his footprints were nowhere to be seen. It was a bizarre reaction. The girl stayed where she was. She was so upset to think that he was disappointed in her. She couldn't think of anything else to do with such an outburst. Yingchang quickly pulled herself together and made the decision to protect the hunters no matter what it cost her. She was ready to push her limit. Angry at the army of the north, she rushed into battle. She was clearly determined to express her resolve in the name of justice. Hiller, one of the high guild members, fell to the ground. The other tried to bring him back to his senses, but it was useless. He wouldn't even open his eyes. He asked for help from the others, hoping that someone still had potions left. He was ready to repay them 100-fold once they were out of the gate. Li Junqiong called it an actual hell. At the time they entered the gate, there were 111 of them. In that time, they had lost half of them. Chang was already distracted by her conversation with Junqiong when she heard a lot of nasty things. Everyone thought she was a traitor who was not worthy of respect. A liar. He didn't understand how they could treat her like this, even though she was still the deputy of the army of the north. The guild's rottenness was also affecting its members. When he noticed that she didn't react to his negativity towards the army of the north, he realized that she no longer had anything to do with them. He suggested she join forces with him, which, as it turned out, she'd thought about more than once. She'd only accepted his offer because she was tired of watching the northern army fall into the abyss. The hunters panicked as soon as the river rose. That could only mean one thing. The game was on. And out came the final boss, the river worm, a creature with a lot of teeth and several rows going in a circle, and the size of this monster was simply impressive. Not only the hunters, but Jung Kyung was surprised to see such an enemy. Chang reminded them that the worm was Young Sun's plan, and he knew how to defeat it. She assured me it was his idea, and there was a solution. All that was left was to wait for the right hour. Before the main one starts hunting the worm, there will be those who will hinder the completion of the raid. They had to be dealt with first. This is the battle. Their first enemies in this battle were not the worm, but Young Sun's aides, who were eager to prevent them from completing the sweep. Chang had to confess everything to the low-level members of the Northern Army, confessing that they were being used to raise their guild's prestige. She tried to tell them that their enemies were not them, but those above them, and if they didn't unite, they would all die. It was terrific to watch in Chang's mood change. Not so long ago, they were enemies. Now, she stood up against those she had previously ruled, and she managed to get through to them. The hunters decided that if they were to stay, they should at least try to fight back. Yong Song, on the other hand, thought this resistance was foolish and urged the army of the north to stick to their old plan. To the surprise of many, he set out to fight. Arrogant, with the most ordinary spear, he literally headed into the mouth of the river worm. It's not without its surprises, of course. This is a monster for A-Rang hunters. As the worm stretched out, it began to soak up all the water around it. When it started to rain, Junkyung guessed that the army of the north was using the river worm to subdue and make the battlefield more comfortable for themselves. If Young Sun had succeeded in completing the raid, he would have become another hero born in this era. A rotten hero is unworthy of his title. Lee Jun-kyung had been preparing for this moment for a long time, but in the last few seconds, he began to wonder if he could handle it. Yong Song had time to assess his opponent, noting that his flames continued to blaze even under such a heavy downpour, but he didn't doubt his victory. Lee Jun-kyung began to attack by charging his weapon with fire. He had only one chance to do what the Demon King couldn't. His opponent was clearly unprepared for an attack from above. So, for a moment, he looked around in confusion. The fiery opponent looked more intimidating from above. Even the guild leader of the Northern Army Guild couldn't handle him. He smashed Young Sun's defense, causing him to step back and begin to doubt his strength. It was unbelievable even for him. Young Sun couldn't understand the reason for this, since his strength should have increased by leaps and bounds by the river. He had a higher rank than Lee Jun-kyung. He taunted him, saying that during his time in the gate, he had managed to raise his rank to A. By continuing to act quietly and carefully, one could achieve great heights. That's precisely what Lee Jun-kyung did. It was only at this point that his opponent realized he had little chance of winning. He needed a contingency plan. So, he decided to act decisively by calling on the waterworm to intercede for him. It was the only option left that had been taken care of earlier. Lee Jun-kyung didn't lose hope, so he continued his attack to overpower his opponent until the waterworm joined him. Yong Song laughed evilly, assuring his opponent that he had more powerful abilities. He had given them to him. The worm acted as if the guild leader was his child who required protection. This was the conclusion that Jun-kyung came to when he saw the following picture. The leader of the Northern Army came to the forefront with complete confidence, for behind him was a considerable defense in the form of a giant waterworm. It's now or never. He reached his enemies with incredible speed. He only had one shot. He headed straight for the worm's mouth. Meanwhile, Chang decided not to miss her chance to get revenge on someone she's been fighting with for the past few years. A close childhood friend, a despot. Young-soo had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He wanted to destroy her. Her antics had pissed him off hundreds of times before, and now the day had finally come. He could point his weapon at her without fear of harm, ruthlessly fought the man he had once been closest to. She wasn't ready to apologize, knowing that the Northern Army would do anything to get out of here victorious. And so, it came to an end. He was sure the army of the North would win. She knew that was the wrong path. They had once given each other their word to defend the planet together. Another fight was going on in parallel. Young Sun was surprised by his opponent's behavior. Risking his life for the sake of others was not the style of the leader of the Northern Army. He wasn't really going into the monster's mouth. He knew that worms, when their children are in danger, swallow them to keep them safe. Especially the inside of the worm was dry, and there was nothing nasty about it. Lee Jun-kyung couldn't be frightened by this. It was enough for him to know the dry facts. He also knew that in the stomach of this monster, the power of the River Lord would be reduced to 0. Still, the power to control the flames would only become stronger. After gaining the necessary skills, Lee Jun-kyung spewed incredibly huge flames directly from the worm's mouth. Being in its stomach did him good. This scared the hunters, who instantly scattered in different directions. They thought the worm had learned to breathe fire. Young Sun wasn't ready to accept his position because he thought he was a king, and kings never back down. He drew his sword and swung it at the one who had ruined his plans. With rage in his eyes, he looked at the one who was guilty of not being king. He decided to make one last push in the hope of fixing something. He had no other choice. Using the Muspelheim spear, Lee Jun-kyung managed to defeat such a formidable opponent. It was an event that changed the course of history. Suddenly, the bracelet on his arm began to make strange sounds. The skull of the Soul Guardian had taken on the soul of the dead hero. That's what he was missing. And then his hunch was confirmed. The bracelet required the souls not of monsters, but of humans. Strong men, those who had already achieved the rank of hero or the highest ranks. Suddenly, he was notified that the patron, the Lord of the Rivers, had been overthrown by a fallen angel, and all support for him had been suspended. A black raven with red eyes formed in front of Lee Jun-kyung's eyes out of nowhere. It demanded an answer from the super rookie to Young Sun's question. Lee Jun-kyung kept consoling himself that he was following the path of the Demon King, and everything he does is for the good of mankind. Without expecting it, he called the name of Ariel, a fallen angel with powers surpassing Lucifer himself. Having heard an interesting though unexpected answer, the raven hurried away but promised to return to him soon. As if caught in a funnel in the sky, the raven disappeared, promising to report everything it saw to its master. Meanwhile, Lee Jun-kyung achieved many more successes, including defeating the waterworm. The hunters were once again surprised by the fall of another monster at the hands of a super rookie. Everything he did seemed incredible to them. He stood with his spear and shield against the falling riverworm, utterly devastated. He didn't know what else he had to endure. The guild members continued to praise him, unable to believe their happiness, as they would now be able to leave the gate and return home. He still had to fight Yong-su, who had been fighting Chang all this time. She called out to him so that he could defend himself. The deputy head of the Northern Army had already pointed his sword directly at Lee Jun-kyung. He hated him after everything that had happened. It was clear that their army was no longer a match. Thanks to the warning, his attack was not unexpected, and Lee Jun-kyung managed to repel his powerful punch. But in a fit of rage, driven by hatred, he continued his attack. He wanted to avenge his brother, who had gone to the grave because of the enemy. Barely restraining the enraged Yong-su, he gave him a chance to speak and channel all his rage into words, leaving actions aside. But in the end, tired of enduring the enemy's attack, Lee Jun-kyung gave him a decisive rebuff that threw the opponent back dozens of meters. Unable to hold it in, Yong-su began to scream. He was in pain, not from the fall, but from the thought of losing his brother. It was explained to him that hunters must protect people from crisis. It is essential to approach this with great responsibility and use force appropriately. And those who abuse the weak have no right to call themselves hunters. That is not their primary purpose. Tired of looking at the outcome of the battle, he realized that they had all fought in vain. They'd lost men for nothing. He decided to finally leave this wretched place. He suggested that he just repent and move on with his life, so he gave him a chance instead of sending him to the next world. However, he did not appreciate this chance, and when Lee Jun-kyung turned his back on him, he decided to take up his sword and stab him in the back. Luckily, Chang was able to react in time and prevented Yong-su from committing this despicable act. She deflected his punch right in front of her back. There was disappointment in his gaze. He couldn't believe she wouldn't let him finish off their main enemy. It finally shattered him. The wound he received was incompatible with life. After he fell face down in the mud, his battle was over. In the same instant, the Soul Keeper notified Lee Jun-kyung that another soul had been absorbed. Ying-chang began to blame herself for not stopping the Northern Army sooner by allowing this to happen. They could have saved the people. She then stuck the sword into the ground, promising herself not to touch it again until all the sins of the Northern Army were atoned for. It meant the end of her battle. And for her, the end was the beginning of something new, a chance to make things right. After all, she was the one whose destiny was to be a hero. Lee Jun-kyung made a promise to himself not to let her break up with him. He just couldn't accept that such a strong fighter was willing to give up. The only thing left to do was to watch. As the hunters came out of the gate, They were confronted by the reporters who had been waiting for them. In the next few minutes, camera flashes flashed every now and then. During the filming, the most attentive noticed that not everyone came out of the gate. The most important people, such as Choi Young-sung and Choi Young-soo, were absent. They concluded that the raid was led by the young man in the middle. This drew a lot of attention to Lee Jun-kyung. Sung-gu didn't miss the opportunity to introduce him to the public. Sung-gu asked the media to leave the hunters alone after they had gone through a tough time cleaning up the gate. It seemed to him that the best thanks would be to pay a small honor to those who had fought. Questions and noise were unnecessary. Hundreds of people supported him. Applause, ovation, words of gratitude. All this was done for 110 people. Not everyone managed to come back. With tears in their eyes, the hunters listened to everything they were told. For them, it was as if they had come back from an absolute hell. The gate that 110 people entered was considered special. They took their lives, allowing only 39 heroes to return. At the same time, the same black raven Hugin, who once flew to Lee Jun-kyung, appeared on the streets of the city. After flying around some streets, he turned to the association building, to the office of the president who was so eagerly awaiting him. Hugin provided him with all the information he had seen at the gate. Lee Jun-kyung was aware of the Northern Army's plans and how they could be defeated. Raven reported to him everything he saw with his red eyes, everything that happened that day, and Lee Jun-kyung's last words. The president was quite curious to hear about a hunter who becomes stronger in battle. He was very impressed with the answer about Agriel. This news prompted him to meet with those who had returned from the gates of the River Rhine. He informed his assistant by telephone. The Army of the North was no longer necessary. The new plan could not be accomplished without them. It was only required to prepare everything for the press. Meanwhile, Chang had returned to the North Army building. She was having a hard time after what had happened. Looking around, she remembered the time when Young Sun gave orders standing on the pedestal. It was empty now. No head or deputy head. She was broken, just tired of being a hunter and having so much responsibility on her shoulders. After the raid at the gate, she was finally convinced of that. Suddenly, her train of thought was interrupted by voices behind her. They were members of the guild of which she was still officially a deputy. They tried to reassure her that the tragedy was not her fault. It was all the fault of the brothers, who were pursuing their own goals using the Army of the North. On their knees, they begged her not to give up. They wanted to live a decent life so that the future generation would not be ashamed of them. Their words moved her, but deep down, she knew that as the last captain of this sinking ship, she was obliged to take all its sins upon herself. But those could not agree with her and accept her decision because there was no turning back. The whole future of the army was behind her, and their hands were already dirty. The realization of their words struck her like a bolt of lightning. She knew that without her, the Army of the North would fail. They would continue to wallow in their sins, if not for her. At this time, Lee Jun-kyung was spending his time with Sung-gu. Sitting in a coffee shop, they discussed the sudden fame of the super rookie. He felt uneasy after realizing his face was all over the media. Even the coffee shop was talking about a fast-talking dark horse. Sung-gu disagreed with Lee Jun-kyung's new nickname. He believed that only those considered weak were referred to as dark horses. But he didn't see anything strange about it because no one knew about his origins. He had lost his memory in the gate, and his past was unknown to anyone. His positive attitude pleased his interlocutor. After all, what was being discussed everywhere could have been perceived by him as an interference in his private life. He wondered how Sung-gu knew all this, but he didn't even know what he was talking about. Lee Jun-kyung, thinking that he already understood, mentioned that he used the hero creation solely for his own purposes. This news stunned Sung-gu. In this era, creating a hero was not a common idea. Everyone believed that heroes were born through fate and the power of patrons. Sung-gu's reaction surprised him. He was sure that he had always understood everything. He thought he was someone who thought outside the box and could figure it out for himself. After all, he was a member of the Asgard. Without realizing it, Lee Jun-kyung said those words. When he remembered the future, they unconsciously came out of his mouth. This situation made Sung-gu furious, causing him to become completely covered in fire. Scared by his reaction, all the people around him simply vanished. While sitting in the association, the president was listening to something when his aide came in. From the outside, it looked as if something had happened. As if sensing what was happening outside, he leaned back in his chair contentedly, adding that he thought something interesting had happened. Sung-gu's true strength was revealed. For the first time in this era, Lee Jun-geong saw what a prominent League guild leader was truly capable of. Sung-gu wondered how he knew who he was. At the time they met in the future, he was already a member of the Vanguard, Heimdall. Lee Jun-kyung also demanded an explanation. The guild leader's actions were arranged as if he had known about his plans for a long time. He did. He'd had his suspicions from the beginning. Growing too fast, the incredible abilities were peculiar for one just awakened. That's when Lee Jun-kyung realized that he had been set a trap that he had fallen for so easily. However, they still didn't know what he was doing it for. His goal was to join the Asgard. This news surprised Sung-gu. He expected to hear anything but this. By becoming a mighty hunter, the possibility of joining Asgard was about to open up for Lee Jun-kyung. This could be the beginning of a real war. It was already in the evening when he proposed a meeting with In Chang. Not knowing for what purpose, she arrived at the meeting place. When she received the offer to join Lee Jun-kyung, she was not thrilled. She realized that she was useless without authority in the Northern Army. He didn't support her thought, considering her a valuable asset. He was sure that her strength and experience would be helpful to him in the future. Angry that everyone thought they knew everything about her, she decided to speak out. She knew the Northern Army was trash, so she thought she was part of it. Lee Jun-kyung didn't react to her cries in any way. He knew that she had a lot of resentment inside her. He decided to support her and asked her what had happened. Then she shared that she was unaware of the actions of the Northern Army. They obeyed the orders of the guild leader, who left her in the dark. He was angry to hear those words. Hundreds of people were suffering, innocent, defenseless people who didn't realize what they were doing by obeying a despot. She sat down on the ground and wrapped her arms around her knees. She wanted to sob with realization. Then she remembered the situation with the hunters and the old man. She admitted that the Northern Army always took out those who stood in their way. Young Sun saw ordinary people as nothing more than cockroaches. I felt sorry for her. For someone so upright, everything she'd been through was too much of a burden. But he couldn't lose a dragon slayer like that. He was curious how she would cope if situations like this continued to happen. After all, she had promised to make things right if she could go back in time. Life went on. Every day, new gates appeared, and hunters continued to discover new powers. Humanity needed a savior. Yingchun calmed herself with the fact that lawlessness was all over the world, not just in her guild. She had already accepted such actions as the norm, which was inevitable. But Lee Jun-kyung decided to reason with her, the person who promised to fight for the people. The world needed to be rid of evil, but it was impossible to do it alone. He couldn't take it anymore, so he started yelling. He tried to tell her that evil had to be eradicated. He could no longer tolerate such injustice. Jung and Chang knew that no one could resist him. He had such a powerful force that no one was even close to him. That's when the puzzle in his head came together. His mission was to save the world, and that's why he went back in time. To change things. To stop evil at the root. She was shocked to hear that the hunter in front of her was from the future. No one could have imagined that this was possible in reality. He told her what awaited every earthling of every hunter shortly. So, he needed her power to prevent it. After coming home from the meeting, Lee Jun-kyung decided to watch the news. As it turned out, all the evil deeds of the Northern Army had come to the surface. When he heard that, he realized it was all a setup. When the Northern Army became useless, he decided to eliminate it to save himself the trouble. Suddenly, the Soul Guardian's skull came to life. A message was received that the bracelet would be reborn as Hyunmu's actual surname. Only after some time did the skull absorb the souls of the brothers, taking with it the water essence of the water worm and the water golem gem. After Lee Jun-kyung repeated the name of his surname, a skull silhouette formed in front of him. The bone dragon was not speechless, which made the task easier. He allowed the thought that, like many heroes, he had made a mistake. No one was trying to harness the true potential of magic. They were only trying to extract more power from it. The Demon King described a method in the book that could be used to achieve this. However, it was explained too superficially, making it challenging to implement. Very soon, the moment of no return was about to come. When the top ranks would fall to the C rank, Lee Jun-kyung needed to become stronger by then. He was distracted from his thoughts by a message from Kim Soo, asking him to meet him by the road so he could take him to the association. A chance to meet him. Kim Soo noticed that Lee Jun-kyung wasn't acting like his usual self. He was too nervous, as if something had happened. However, he simply pointed out that he's precisely the same person and can have such basic feelings. He was really nervous before the meeting. The inspector was actually surprised not by the fact that Li Jun was excited, but by the fact that he was more anxious before the association meeting than when he entered the gate. Kim Soo's words that meeting with the president might be uncomfortable because you can't talk to him freely made him tense up. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong that the president had called him in for, but the thought of more than 50 people dying in the raid was breaking him. There was no doubt that the meeting was not a usual occasion for congratulations on their survival. This was supposed to be an investigation. During the trip, Jun Kyung remembered the day he and Sung-gu had discussed Asgard. He was against it. The times when Asgard was on the dark side. When he met the Demon King, he was already doubting Asgard, but he found no reason to leave it. It wasn't long before they were out of there together. Lee Jun-kyung was aiming to get to Asgard faster than the Demon King did. He was ready to squeeze everything he could out of him. Standing in front of the president's office, he held his breath. This was an inspiring meeting for him, and he didn't know what to expect. Strange as it may seem, the president did not even immediately turn to his guest. Although he was really looking forward to his arrival, he said he'd forgotten about his appointment for that day. He had too much to do to forget. Without being modest, he reminded them that he held a high position and did a lot for the Hunters Association. His name was Jang Hyo-jin. From the Demon King's biography, Jun Kyung knew a lot about him, so he decided not to be coy about it, but to reveal all the cards and find out who was in front of him. He knew that Lee Jun-kyung was suspicious of his support for the Northern Army. These obvious facts no longer require explanation. It was a waste of time. But he looked at him with a complete lack of understanding of what he wanted to hear. The two strong hunters looked at each other, waiting for something. Remembering the advice to not trust Odin's words since they were all lies, Lee Jun-kyung smiled smugly and agreed. The president was very bored watching his interlocutor, who did not seem to be interested in keeping the conversation going. He sensed a vast difference between them. He took his hands off the records and voiced out all of Lee Jun-kyung's accomplishments over the past 2 months. All of his victories were meticulously tracked, as were all his ups and downs. Burning the records in his hands with anger, Jang Hyo-jin recognized that the speed of his pumping was simply unimaginable, and he was definitely enjoying it. But he didn't like the fact that Jun Kyung had dared to go overboard and send the leader of the North's army, Choi Yong-seong, whom he had personally raised, into the world. Lee Jun-kyung made it clear right away that there was a reason. His life was in danger, and he was to blame. He guessed who the Raven belonged to. The arrogance of his opponent had enraged the president. The man standing in front of him destroyed their plans, destroyed a part of him that he had nurtured since childhood. Not wishing to continue this topic, the newcomer, as suggested earlier, got down to business. He voiced his intention to join Asgard. He managed to surprise Jang Hyo-jin. However, he had doubts that he knew where he wanted to go without knowing what Asgard was. In Lee Jun-kyung's mind, Asgard was a group of hunters created to save humanity. The leader was Odin, president. The realization that he had been tricked, and all this time Lee Jun-kyung had known about his plans, the riverworm and the crow, threw him into hysterical laughter. He was just following a book written by a demon king. He knew the enemy's moves ahead of time, and he knew that out of curiosity, Jang Hyo-jin wouldn't refuse him. Even his eye didn't work on Lee Jun-kyung, the eye in which was also described in the autobiography. The fallen angel was simply blocking out information. Forbidding him from revealing this information, he promised to take Lee Jun-kyung into the ranks of Asgard. But before he could do that, he had to pass 2 tests. After meeting with the president, he went to a coffee shop where he decided to reevaluate everything that had happened in the association, including the actions of the fallen angel. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't notice Chang approaching. He apologized and asked her to sit across from him. The only reason she went there was to meet with the association's head. However, the meeting had actually already taken place. He told her that what the Army of the North had done was a disgrace, but she didn't dare ask what it was for. After discussing all the details, they came to the conclusion that In Chang was no threat to Odin, so he decided not to touch her. He could destroy the Army of the North. In Chang, she practically burst into tears after realizing she was worthless. Even someone like Jang Hyo-jin didn't see her as an enemy because he didn't think she was capable of such a thing. Lee Jun-kyung couldn't bear to see his friend beating herself up. He held out his hand to her as a gesture of support, showing that he was with her. She pulled herself together and trusted him, and she reciprocated his feelings. She really had nothing to lose. It seemed to him that Being inside the gates of the Rhine River, she had managed to attract the attention of one of the patrons, but he didn't know which one. She shared that she'd never encountered any patrons, but Prince Charming gave her a dragon's bloodstone. As a token of gratitude, Yingchang gave him this stone, a stone that, according to the book, was only supposed to appear 3 times in history. It was difficult for the hunter to accept such a valuable gift, but the girl insisted. She just didn't know anything about it and couldn't use it properly. He had never imagined that he would get the stone so easily. He realized that she might be in trouble after she handed over her gift. But Yingchang wasn't ready to retract her words. She wanted to thank the man who believed in her. She couldn't wait to start working with him. Thinking about how easy it was for him to get his hands on this stone, he concluded that Yingchang was an unbelievable simpleton who had missed out on such a treasure. But she didn't see anything wrong with that and just smiled sweetly at him. The next day, Li Junqiang decided to visit his new acquaintance, the blacksmith. When he saw the dozens of weapons on the wall in the forge, he was surprised. Park Jae-hyun, realizing the displeasure in his eyes, immediately decided to justify that they weren't finished. After thanking him for his help, he pointed out that the deliveries were lame. Li Junqiang was in his position, accepting that materials don't come from nowhere. It all happened too fast. And then he took out the dragon stone, thus showing the blacksmith the valuable material. He expected him to be surprised to see it. That's what happened. Park Jae-hyun had never encountered this item before. It's not surprising if the mineral was so rare. The blacksmith knew that it could not be a gift for him because he thought it was a fool to accept it for nothing. The price of the mineral was too high. With a smile on his face, Li Junqiang picked up the hammer from the wall of the forge and headed toward the table. He knew what he had to do. Park Jae-hyun didn't appreciate his movement. He looked at him with a puzzled look. Fearing that the hunter was up to something bad, he tried to stop him. Swinging with all his might, Junqiang swung the hammer straight at the stone lying on the table. The blacksmith, unable to believe his eyes, screamed at him, begging him to stop what he was doing. But nothing could stop him. The stone split in 2, but nothing magical happened. And nothing bad happened either. Li Junqiang knew what he was doing. Park Jae-hyun looked at the collapsed stone, both parts of which looked like 2 drops of water. With enough blood inside the stone, it could be regenerated. One piece could be placed in a Muspelheim spear. The second stone he asked to be placed in a gladius that was very similar to the one that belonged to Siegfried, described in the book of the Demon King. The next day, Li Junqiang went to the gate with In Chang. There, they felled hundreds of orcs, thanks to which they filled the stone by almost 2%. Yingchang was delighted with her new weapon, the gladius. She liked it so much that it seemed to merge with her hand. It was as if they had become one. And he didn't doubt Park Jae-hyun's skill, who couldn't be compared to any other blacksmith. She never once regretted putting the stone in the right hands. After all, only he would know how to use it in the right place. From the side, an incredibly huge orc was watching him. A little while later, he pointed his giant bat at them. Thanks to his skills, Li Junqiang managed to avoid being hit. He instantly jumped to the side. Slowly, he started walking towards where he had been talking to In Chang a minute ago. He didn't know where she had gone, but he hoped she was okay. She, on the other hand, had no dodging ability and was able to defend herself with her sword. Holding it above her, she managed to keep the ogre from crushing her. Siegfried's sword was capable of fighting back even a dragon, deflecting all of its attacks. The ogre was surprised to see the man using pure power to strike back. As she flew up, she was able to defeat the ogre with a single strike of this unusual sword. So incredible was its power. Tired after the battle, she sat down on the ground. To cheer up his companion, Li Junqiang thanked her for always having his back. She was glad to hear that she wasn't really useless and that her presence could save someone's life. It motivated her not to give up. He also reminded her that they would need to go there in 2 days. Soon, there was no time to waste. The following 2 days were to be spent fighting battles that would help them hone their teamwork. That way, their chance of surviving in the future would be higher. After 2 days, it was time for the test from Odin. He and Yingchang did their best by taking their time to the max. It's just a pity Siegfried hasn't shown up yet. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was nighttime, and he didn't seem to be expecting anyone. It was Song Gu who had decided to visit him the night before the test. He came to him with a warning not to go to the test. He was sure that this place was going to be more dangerous than the Rhine River Gate. He could have died there. He also added that he had thought a lot about why Lee Jun-kyung wanted to join Asgard, how he had come to know about him, and what his intentions were. But he decided to trust him. Lee Jun-kyung was surprised that Sung-gu had complete trust in him. Unlike him, he couldn't remember anything. The satisfied top-ranked guild leader decided not to comment on his thoughts. He simply referred to what his intuition told him. As he was about to leave, Sung-gu reminded him again not to go to the test. He thought that Odin would accept the hunter into Asgard as it was. But after thanking him for his concern, Lee Jun-kyung promised to return from the test by all means, alive. He still had things to do on Earth. The next day, he and In Chang met with Kim Soo, who was to escort them to the mission. As they walked, Lee Jun-kyung congratulated his mentor on his promotion. He was more excited about being sent on an international expedition. He left them near the door, asking them to wait a while. Soon the gate should open automatically. A portal to London appeared in front of them. It could only mean one thing: the test had begun. Entering the gate and finding themselves in London, they encountered two men who had already heard of the Dark Horse. They were honored. They had to adjust to England. Fortunately, Lee Jun-kyung knew English. He introduced himself and told them that they had been sent by the Korean Association. They were told that they would be escorted to their rooms and that in the evening, a party would be held to celebrate the arrival of hunters from different countries. Chang was worried that she didn't know English and couldn't understand what people were saying to her. Lee Jun-kyung tried to explain everything to her. Suddenly, there was silence in a room full of noise. Many people were thrown into a sweat, and a lump rose in their throats. A hunter, as big as an ogre, had decided to attend the party. When he approached them, he was a little perturbed. When he heard the news about the two hunters from Korea, he expected to see two fools, but in fact, they were ordinary lovebirds. He was clearly trying to get on Lee Jun-kyung's nerves. He was making up all sorts of insults to hurt the Korean Association hunters. From the frightened faces of the others and her companion, Ying Chang realized that the bulky man was talking about something bad. She could only rely on the reactions of the others. In addition to Asgard, there were several hunter-led organizations around the world. The defense of mankind had taken a back seat to the struggle for power. While Lee Jun-kyung was distracted by his thoughts, the giant continued to press him for answers to his tricky questions. He didn't like being ignored. A trickle of sweat ran down his face as he realized he'd have to answer after all. This hunter didn't fit in with the rest of the place. Based on the book, after the Rhine River Gate, Gunther was waiting for the Battle of the Dungeon. But Lee Jun-kyung destroyed young Sion, changing the course of history. Gunther was gone. The sudden torrent of insults stopped. A voice behind him stopped the bully, ordering him to back away from the newly arrived hunters. A blonde-haired guy entered the hall, clearly having considerable respect there. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to silence the giant. He expressed his pleasure to meet such a famous hunter. The Dark Horse was being talked about not only in Korea, but also in England. Demetrius was outraged when he learned of the hunter's nickname. He thought he was incapable of even striking a blow, much less reaching such heights. After watching them, Lee Jun-kyung realized that the man George had just entered was Odysseus, who had died at the hands of his friend Hercules in the future. They shook hands with equal admiration for each other. They shook hands, admiring each other equally. When Demetrius was asked to apologize to the guests, he was pleased to realize that he could do it by simply shaking hands, or not just shaking hands. After introducing himself and extending his hand to Lee Jun-kyung, he asked him to explain what he meant by saying that he had heard about his homeland of Greece. Ying Chang intervened, and although she didn't understand their speech, she knew that shaking hands with the giant would do no good. The insolence infuriated Demetrius. He turned his anger on the girl, scaring his partner George. But what surprised him was that Ying Chang was able to contain Hercules' brute strength, and that made Demetrius even angrier. When he was tired of enduring it, he was able to throw her aside with one mighty blow. It was all fun for him, so he had nothing but laughter at this situation. However, he was impressed to learn that more than one unique person had arrived. George decided to take the hit and, making a deep bow, apologized for Demetrius's behavior. He promised that they would see each other again later. After they left, Ying Chang remained depressed. She was afraid that they would have to defeat an opponent like the one they had just faced. Yes, it was. Hercules was a dangerous opponent who was simply impossible to defeat, and they didn't stand a chance. But thanks to the book, Lee Jung-kyung knew Demetrius's weak spot. He could be defeated, but only under certain circumstances. While the other members of the secret organization were getting to know each other, they were gathering the necessary information about one another. The Dark Horses were not involved. The escort was surprised that the hunters volunteered to secure the gate, even though they were overseas. They wanted to keep practicing and strengthening their skills. They cited the fact that tourist activities can be done at any time, but participation in the cleanup is not always possible. Lee Jun-kyung was determined to stay in the gate until they got what they needed, even if another portal was required. They agreed to proceed with their special plan. Chang was required to repeat the same things she had done at the Korean gate, training with an emphasis on defense. He was worried that with his current skills, he was unable to resist Hercules. But Ying Chang, with her abilities, could help. She was shocked when Lee Jung-kyung started to move away. She was sure that they would move together and not separate. But not this time. He asked her to wait for him on the spot and warned her that she would understand in time. On that note, he left, and she had time to think. Just a few weeks ago, she was a wreck. But now, thanks to Lee Jun-kyung, she had a patron who was pleased with her actions. Before she knew it, her partner was rushing past, giving the order to start training. She was stunned, uncomprehending. Several angry, fat ogres were coming right at them. This was something beyond the Dark Horses. The dungeon boss, a two-headed ogre, was also present among the ogres. Lee Jun-kyung rushed away from them, hoping that In Chang would be able to fight them. She was so frightened that at first she refused and ran with him. But when she realized that he had taken care of her by telling her to fill her inventory with healing potions, she turned around. Immediately after In Chang rushed into the fight with the ogres, Lee Jun-kyung summoned his familiar. They needed his help. He gave him orders to help the girl in the battle using the cure potion on her as soon as she was in danger. Hyunmoo accepted his request. Lee Jung-kyung planned to go in search of the missing piece of the puzzle that was needed to defeat Hercules. But it wasn't that simple. The puzzle was in the B-rank ogre settlements. He managed to set them on fire, but they weren't the problem. A red-eyed ogre mage. That's what was truly terrifying. Even the strongest heroes tried to avoid him. Meanwhile, Sung-gu showed up at the association. He was furious that Lee Jung-kyung had been sent to London. Security tried to stop him at the entrance, explaining that his behavior was unacceptable within the building, especially in the presence of the president. But Jang Hyo-jin let him pass, leaving them alone together. He expected that this conversation would happen someday. The guild leader pretended not to understand what was going on and why Song-gu had come to him. The guild leader did not believe in this spectacle. He activated the force field, blocking Sung-gu's power. Jang Hyo-jin was curious if he would abide by the rules of Asgard within the association. He was insanely indignant when Sung-gu rebuked him, citing what Asgard was founded for and what rules they should have followed before. In reality, the leader of the Major League Guild understood everything perfectly. He knew that he wouldn't be listened to. All his words were empty words to the president. Almost ready to destroy Song-gu, he stopped when he learned that the reason he had come was not for Lee Jun-kyung, but for Hercules. As it turned out, Jang Hyo-jin really didn't know that Hercules was also supposed to take part in the battle. Olympus decided to break the agreement. Sung-gu was about to go to London to help Lee Jung-kyung when the president stopped him. The death of a dark horse was not in his plans. If Lee Jun-kyung was in danger, he would have been notified immediately. But the fact that Olympus did such a sneaky thing allowed Jang Hyo-jin to get away with it. Sung-gu had a bad feeling, even though a pact had been signed, and for good reason. Even though they didn't know it, Odin's pact had long since been broken by the fallen angel. Meanwhile, Lee Jun-kyung had found a solution to the missing puzzle. All he had to do was to get rid of the ogre guarding it. Using fire, he managed to lure the ogre mage out of the settlement and get to the Easter egg so necessary for the battle with Hercules. The most important piece he needed to have any chance of getting out of here and into Asgard. He was glad he'd been able to find it without any trouble. All that was left was to defeat the monster behind him. The ogre mage wasn't stupid, so a moment later he returned, and he was clearly not happy to have a visitor. After waiting for a second, Lee Jun-kyung rushed out, hoping that the ogre would not be able to run at such a high speed due to its mass. And he was wrong. He was running so fast, he could have trampled the dark horse. That's what he was trying to do, trampling everything around him in the hope of getting hit. He would like to leave this monster for when Hercules is destroyed, but then it would be pointless. A hero doesn't put victory on hold. With his spear in hand, he headed for the ogre. Like all monsters facing Lee Jun-kyung, he stepped out. The gate was cleared. While they spent their time fighting, the others attended parties. Demetrius and George noticed their absence, unlike the others. Hercules really wanted to go to the gate, but his partner was against it, saying that he had already caused a lot of problems. Plus, he had disobeyed Olympus. Knowing that someone was going to come from Olympus for ignoring the treaty, Demetrius was sure he could protect them both. Odysseus even had to hide Theseus from his partner. But he had his bets on the dark horse. He knew he was just underestimating him. The next day, Lee Jun-kyung went hunting again. But this time, he decided to go without In Chang, thinking that she was not in the best condition. She made it clear that it was his own fault that she wasn't feeling well. After all, it had been his idea for her to fight a dozen ogres. He thought he had given her a valuable skill that would help her develop her physical abilities, but now she needed to rest. Then he went to the Street of Alchemy, a place with great magical power. There, he found a magic store with magical things. Although it offered a variety of options, the place was called a phone booth. A charming red-haired girl stood behind the booth. She was very friendly, ready to offer her customers anything they needed, but she was the one he needed, Park Yu-jin. When she heard her name, the smile on the beautiful lady's face immediately changed to a grin. She didn't like the fact that the stranger had come during the opening, and he knew her. He had read about her in a book, the younger sister of the most excellent blacksmith of all time, the best alchemist. She was Hephaestus. Given that he knew she also practiced blacksmithing in addition to alchemy, he assumed it came from Park Jae-hyun. A week later, she melted the red ore and coated the spear with it. She wondered who he was, what kind of mineral, and why he was doing this. But all unanswered. He advised her to go back to Korea. She could find the best minerals there. Of course, it was to his advantage for the brother and sister to team up and help him. She thought Lee Jun-kyung was an arrogant person who believed he could obtain minerals that even Olympus didn't have, and she found it amusing. A blue beam lit up the sky from the main building. It was so bright it lit up the neighboring houses, and there was a reason for that. All the people on the street took notice of it. Everyone turned around to look at the splendor. It meant only one thing: the raid was about to begin. Reporters were already at the site near the gate, announcing the start of the raid. All hunters involved in the raid were asked to stand by. When she saw not only hunters but also humans, Ying Chang was afraid that she would have to fight them as well. But they only needed to win by clearing the gate. As soon as she was glad that the hunters didn't have a goal to harm each other, Lee Jun-kyung landed her. She was the only one who thought that way. The hunters had different goals. Demetrius was furious when he saw the people he didn't know. He didn't understand how the non-names could participate in a raid. It was absurd. He was angry at those who stared at him. He couldn't stand it any longer and went to confront them. George stopped him just in time to remind him that they weren't even at the gate yet. The giant only gritted his teeth in response, complaining that someone had looked at him wrong. A slanted glance was enough for him to go and destroy them. Pointing his finger at Lee Jun-kyung, he turned his attention to him. The dark horse gave him a wild thrill. He was sure that he was incapable of anything, but he liked the look in his eyes. It stirred the big man. Laughing, he wished him luck. He couldn't wait to meet him at the gate. That's it. The raid was announced, and all hunters were asked to enter through the gate that had opened, the gates of Mount Catalan. Before entering the portal, Lee Jun-kyung asked In Chang to immediately run as far away as possible as soon as they set foot on the gate lands. She didn't like his plan. As she entered the gate, Ying Chang felt an explosion immediately. She remembered his request and was about to run away, but something held her back. Or rather, someone. Right in the middle of the sand was a man. He looked terrible because he was missing some of his limbs. He was asking for her help. She remembered Lee Jun-kyung's words, that she needed to run as far away as possible without distractions. But she couldn't. She couldn't just leave a man to die. She decided to give him a healing potion in the hope that he would get better. She wanted to know what happened. But he did not answer her. It was the end for this hunter. Looking at his lifeless body, she tried to understand what could have happened in the first minute. The next wave, Ying Chang, feeling threatened, was instantly able to repel the attack. She guessed who was responsible for all of this. Hercules' silhouette appeared amidst the flames. He was pleased. To fight someone who could at least not die after the first blow was unrealistic for him. When she saw his face, she was horrified. After all, his attack was much stronger than the ogre boss. Ying Chang seemed to have little chance of defeating him. Hercules didn't give up and continued to tease her, calling her a chicken who was rubbing up against a dark horse. He was glad he'd decided to take part in the raid after all. With a swing, he was going to finish off the annoying huntress. He thought it would be easy to take her down, even though she was strong. But she wasn't so simple. Her sword was so mighty that not everyone could handle it. He tried to provoke her into a fight, hoping it would escalate into a real confrontation. Still, she merely took the attack and attempted to block it. After learning that In Chang still hadn't obtained any title, he decided to honor her by observing his skill. Her bones were already cracking at the seams from what she had seen. An incredible ability she had never encountered before was revealed to her. A wild beast. The giant face of a tiger appeared before her. She froze, not knowing what to do next. There seemed to be no escape. Hercules had never spared anyone, and she was no exception. Li Junkyung appeared next to her, and without thinking, she decided to retreat, shouting this to In Chang. They needed to escape to a safer place. Together, they headed in the opposite direction of Hercules. They knew that if there was another explosion, they had to be as far away as possible. Hercules was furious as he watched their retreating figures. He realized that they could not avoid the battle. Sooner or later, they would face him anyway. Once they were in a safe place, they stopped. Ying Chang shared what she had observed. She shared with him about the explosion and the hunters who had died from it. Li Junkyung thought it was all a trap. Probably after entering the gate, the hunters immediately decided to attack Hercules. But that was not the case. It was then that Ying Chang realized where the warning to run away came from. The hunters knew what this prank of attacking a giant could lead to. She was glad she hadn't had a chance to experience Hercules' ability. It was scary to imagine what could have happened to her with such a powerful attack. He felt that all they had to worry about at that moment was how to survive. Surviving an A-rank gate is no easy task. Besides Hercules' hunters, other enemies were waiting for them, like the A-rank monsters, Catalan lions. That was something to be afraid of. There was help from the outside. He sent Hyunmoo on a reconnaissance mission so that he would know for sure what or who they were facing. After inspecting the surroundings, the henchman reported that no hunters had been found. Li Jongkyung sent him to continue watching. It was time for them to move out. Before moving on, Ying Chang decided to bid farewell to the dead and made graves for them herself. To Li Junkyung, it seemed amusing. Burying the bodies of her enemies could only be her style. She felt responsible for her sins. Ying Chang couldn't fully understand the course of their subsequent actions. What was better, taking part in the mess or defeating the boss? Either way, there was a plan in place. The plan was known only to Li Junkyung, who decided to kill two birds with one stone. He knew how to defeat both the boss and Hercules. Hyunmoo reported the situation. There were 3 hunters with skull tattoos nearby. Li Junkyung assumed that they were to blame for the explosion that happened right after they entered the gate. He decided that they had pissed off Hercules, who instantly started attacking, destroying everything around him. In any case, we had to be ready to kill them. They left the hunters tied to a tree, as bait for those who were bigger and more dangerous than they were, as expected. Hercules and Odysseus followed the trail of the dark horse. That's when they came upon the hunters. Odysseus knew they had something to do with the Borgen, a shadowy North African organization that trafficked not only drugs, but also children. He also said that they had ambushed him at the gate. He realized that he would never forgive them for such a transgression. There was hatred in his eyes. He was not ready to forgive slanted glances in his direction, much less a surprise attack. They begged for mercy, saying they realized their mistake. Going to the other side of the world at the hands of Hercules could be one of the worst things in the gate. He hastened to reassure them, saying that he approved of what they had done. He was willing to do anything to achieve his victory, so he refrained from condemning them up to a certain point, as long as they didn't break the rules. In dungeon warfare, it was forbidden to ambush the entrance. With one blow, he sent all 3 of them to the other side. After he got rid of the ill-wishers, the patron of the stomping monster approved of his actions. Odysseus condemned Hercules for breaking the rules himself by not listening to Olympus and beating Theseus to a pulp. He should have punished himself. He didn't care about anything. There was only one goal for him now, to find and fight the dark horse as soon as possible. These words moved Odysseus. He did not want this to happen because he felt that it would not end well. The hunters, as it seemed to them, were ready to fight with such a terrible enemy as Hercules. They prepared their weapons and were about to attack him. It was behavior like that that prompted him to go to them. He didn't mind having fun because he was definitely enjoying it. All the hunter's antics only amused him. With one mighty blow, Hercules could take down dozens of hunters. Odysseus didn't like the fact that his partner didn't even want to draw his weapon for the sake of decency. Hercules was incredibly violent. He fought with his bare hands to feel the crunch of the bones of each of his victims. The same thing awaited the dark horse. Meanwhile, Lee Jun-kyung and In Chang were on their way. Their primary goal was to defeat the boss and then confront Hercules. Along the way, they encountered people. He didn't sense any bloodlust and victory in them. They were clearly not hunters on a raid. In front of them stood several dozen people. At the head were two men dressed as if they had come straight from hot countries. They were clearly waiting for someone. As it turned out, the dark horse was exactly what they needed. They were annoyed that it had been too long since they'd shown up on the horizon. He was confused when they jumped on him with condemnation, and when he learned that they knew he'd been sent by Asgard, he was just as stunned. Suddenly, they stepped aside and began discussing something actively. Lee Jun-kyung couldn't make out what they were saying. It was the first time he had seen these people. Introducing himself as Inev from the lands of the Nile, the man told him that they had come to help. Everyone knew that this battle was going to end in Asgard's victory. The Egyptian Nile sent people to help because, with the appearance of Hercules, the situation had become very complicated, and they needed a guaranteed victory. Then he realized that the reason why Choi Young-sun was able to win was because of this. He definitely couldn't have done it alone. They offered the Dark Horses their help in the battle with the boss. It was simply impossible to deal with him on one's own. But Lee Jun-kyung had his own plans. He refused their help. He wanted to deal with Hercules on his own. It seemed too obvious for him to simply defeat the boss. It would mean he was acting as a puppet in Odin's hands, obeying his orders. It also seemed logical for In Chang to avoid fighting Hercules and only defeat the boss. But she decided not to contradict her partner by offering to go together. He was glad she backed him up and didn't fight him. They'd been through enough together for him to rely on her. After hearing Lee Jun-kyung's plan, the hunters sent by the Egyptian Nile decided to stay away. No one wanted to be involved in a battle with Hercules. They thought that if they could do without it, it was better not to risk themselves and stay intact. They wondered how Asgard could have sent a man with such a plan. Inev told them who the boss was. He also noted that none of his men would help him in the battle with Demetrius by staying in the shadows. Once again, they were back where they started. Even though help had been sent to them, in the end, they would have to fight alone as well. Lee Jun-kyung had foreseen this outcome a long time ago. They hadn't counted initially on anyone, so it didn't stop them. The people of ancient Egypt knew it would be hard. However, they believed that Lee Jun-kyung could do it because he had succeeded many times. Rhine River Gate, North 1 Army. It seemed to Inev that due to his potential, he was not inferior to the leaders of shadowy organizations, and his companion disagreed strongly. He believed that everyone had decided to stay back to fully appreciate the Dark Horse's abilities. Everyone wanted to watch the legendary battle. Meanwhile, Lee Jun-kyung and In Chang had already reached the boss. It was a large Catalan lion. Under this pressure, their skill level immediately dropped. But Lee Jun-kyung wasn't so easy to give up. He did his best to resist. That's how he managed to regain his level. According to his plan, he was to concentrate on the right flank, while In Chang was already ready on the left flank. The main thing was to conserve his strength. Hyunmoo didn't stay aside, promising to back them up. The familiar was right in front of Catalan's eyes. The lion was strong, but the sword in Ying Chang's hands was able to withstand even this kind of attack. While Catalan was distracted, Lee Jun-kyung decided to attack him from the other side. The Muspelheim spear was going to help him with that. However, the boss was A rank, so defeating him wasn't so easy. He could control the situation from all sides. Realizing that Master wasn't doing well, Hyunmoo decided to intervene. He used blue flames to distract the monster. The stream of fire was directed directly at the lion's left eye. This helped to temporarily subdue it and give the hunters time to gather. Lee Jun-kyung decided to remind In Chang about the importance of conserving her strength since Demetrius was going to appear immediately in Phase 2. Meanwhile, the big man was following their trail, sending the other hunters to their deaths. He was eager for the moment when he would encounter the Dark Horse. George reminded them to hold their horses because they were going to meet him anyway. Hercules didn't like it. He couldn't take it anymore. This behavior led Odysseus to believe that Lee Jun-kyung was aware of the giant's ability. He could have gone mad with bloodlust, and that's why he left them for him. To ensure everything was still under control, he asked Hercules if he was certain he would be able to stay sane until the primary battle. But he was tired of repeating that there was nothing to worry about. He was stronger now, and he couldn't lose his head in bloodlust. When he heard the noise and saw the colored flames nearby, he rejoiced. The hour had come. Odysseus had faith in him. The dark horse was almost in the palm of their hands. Catalan was angrier than ever, but as strange as it was, he didn't attack. He just stood there. It was weird behavior for a boss. Yingchang thought he didn't move because they had succeeded, and how wrong they really were. It was just a transition. A huge fireball formed around the lion, which made it impossible to see anything. As soon as he slept, hundreds of Catalan lions appeared near Catalan. Watching this picture with horror, Inev noted that they had managed to deal with the first phase, but they were wasting time by not attacking him in the transition between stages. Yingchang complained that she could feel the demonic power in her bones. She sincerely hoped that this was the case and that everything was going according to plan. It was the second phase that was written about in the book. Li Junqiang knew that, so he waited for the protagonist, and here he is. Hercules jumped into the commotion with complete confidence. He knew he would find them here. He landed right in the middle of the battlefield. He found this to be quite an enjoyable activity. However, he didn't understand why Li Junqiang was still inactive. Demetrius was more interested in dark horses than monsters. With a single swing of his hand, he destroyed a Catalan lion flying at him. He reduced him to a pile of worthless dust. Such dangerous and formidable A-rank monsters simply dissolved in his hands. They instantly became a regular black puddle that could no longer carry a threat. It was so impressive and so horrible at the same time. Li Junqiang could not even imagine the power that lurked within that vast body of Hercules, but they were about to experience it. When the second phase came, Catalan grew 2 more horns on his forehead. With them, the lion seemed even more dangerous and threatening, for his strength had increased many times over. Hercules didn't really care what was going on around him. At that moment, he saw only 2 enemies, who, for some reason, ran away. In Chang and Li Jung, Kyung saw the renewed Catalan and turned to run, leaving him for Demetrius. That was their main plan. Ignoring the lion, he rushed after them. He took it as an attempt to avoid fighting him, not knowing what lay ahead. Catalan didn't wait for someone to decide to go after him, so instantly the boss went after them, practically outrunning Demetrius. When Yingchang turned around, she saw the enemies advancing on their tails. The only thing that surprised her was that Catalan didn't attack the giant. At that time, Li Junqiang explained to her that he was chasing after them since they had inflicted the first damage on him. Soon, he was going to attack everyone around him with his energy. The hunters who had not yet reached the main boss were not happy about the guests who ran past them and brought enemies in the form of Catalan and Hercules. Catalan, accompanied by Catalan's lions, following In Chang and Li Junqiang, carried straight toward the crowd of hunters. Deciding that the boss had succumbed entirely to the demonic power and had lost his mind, they were ready to take the attack. They prepared their swords and waited for the attack. Suddenly turning around, Hercules decided to defeat Catalan. He didn't need an opponent who could deprive him of the pleasure of fighting Li Junqiang. While he was busy with the boss, Li Junqiang and In Chang had time to catch their breath. They managed to buy some time and gather their strength. The girl was shocked to see the bottle in his hands. It was clearly not a healing potion. It was something she hadn't noticed before. Apparently, it was Plan B. He saved it for when he needed extra power, a secret weapon. For a brief moment, Muspelheim's spear was filled with extra magic. Thanks to the potion he had drunk, he was able to strengthen his weapon, albeit temporarily. He didn't know what effect would follow after the dragon bloodstone absorbed the red ore. His spear began to emit a dazzling glow. A teardrop ran down Yingchang's cheek. She couldn't understand what was happening. She felt like something terrible was about to happen, but there was no choice. Hercules fought desperately against Catalan. 2 such strong rivals in the same arena. There was no winner there. He threw blow after blow at the boss, but nothing worked. He had to use something more powerful to beat this level. With a smile on his face, Hercules decided to show everyone his abilities. It was a confident step towards victory. He couldn't understand why everything had stopped because he was ready to unleash his inner beast. Something had stopped him, or rather, who? It was Odysseus. He covered the giant with his weapon so that the beams of energy wouldn't hit him. Such power could have knocked him off his feet. Once again, he reminded him of the importance of carrying a weapon because he could be wounded before he could cover himself or dodge an attack. He noticed that Lee Junkyung's weapon had changed. He assumed that it had the same effect as the beast's roar. But the man saw no problem with that. The dark horses were nothing more than mosquitoes to him, which he asked Odysseus to deal with himself. He left him to go on to fight the lion. It was taken by Odysseus, as if he was underestimated. When he turned around, he saw her. Ying Chang stealthily approached him from the side to fight a fair fight. Her gaze was full of confidence that this opponent was a match for her. She unsheathed her weapon and rushed into battle. She aimed the point of her sword straight at Odysseus's heart, hoping that one blow would be enough. It wasn't as easy as it seemed in theory. His opponent was not a bad guy, so he was able to dodge the punch with agility. Ying Chang was able to fend off his counterpunch. A little while later, Odysseus realized that someone didn't have enough experience to concentrate such a large amount of chi energy over a long distance. Hyunmoo came to Chang's rescue. He aimed a bright charge directly at her overconfident opponent, thus giving him no chance to repel the attack. She didn't miss her chance. Instantly, a pink veil enveloped the entire place, making it difficult to see where it ended. When the dust settled, Odysseus was left puzzled. Instead of attacking, Ying Chang ran away. How frivolous to abandon the case halfway through. He had a lot of questions. At the very least, why she'd left him alive, why she'd hit the ground, and what had shot through his skull so sticky and sweet. And then his fears were confirmed. Monster pheromones. He came to his senses when a massive pack of lions was closing in on him, eager to tear him apart. He couldn't believe the dark horses had the idea to use a potion to eliminate him, and how he'd managed to fall for their trick. Watching as Hercules fiercely confronted Boss Catalon, he couldn't get his head around just how much power the bulky man possessed. When In Chang approached him, he assumed with a smile on his face that since she had come, she had managed to defeat Odysseus after all. Hyunmoo appeared next to her. She said that she couldn't handle him alone, so a helper flew in. She told him what kind of trap they had set for Hercules' partner. Then, Lee Jung-kyung told her to hurry up before he returned. Meanwhile, Hercules did not lose his strength. Even though the battle had been going on for a long time, he was sure of his victory. For him, it was just an amusement. Lee Jun-kyung was upset to realize that Demetrius could still control himself. He hoped to lose control soon. They needed to go ahead with their plan. Chang was to distract Catalan, and Lee Jun-kyung was to take on the giant. Hercules didn't need to be sent to the afterlife just to strike him while he was in berserk mode. It was time to begin. Demetrius Catalan struck again. So powerful was his arm that it threw the monster from a great height. It seemed to be the end. It was like a challenge to him. He laughed so hard that it seemed any opponent was weak to him. The power Catalan possessed was not enough for him. He looked down from the cliff to make sure the boss had been defeated. But instead of the lion, it was him that caught his eye, the dark horse, the one he'd been waiting for. Lee Jun-kyung was ready to finally take responsibility for everyone and get rid of Hercules, holding everyone in fear. Taunting such a powerful opponent, he offered to fight one-on-one. And if this was all just entertainment, it was time to play big. Demetrius accepted his challenge. Even though he had already spent a lot of time in battle, he still had the strength to defeat another one. Everything was going according to plan. Lee Jun-kyung was counting on the giant to satisfy his ego and fight the legendary dark horse. His opponent didn't appreciate the idea of using mana to fill his shield. He thought the idea was silly, and he was going to prove it to him. Inev, watching from the sidelines, didn't understand why Lee Jun-kyung had decided to go against Demetrius, because the Rhino Strike couldn't even withstand his charged shield. As if following Inev's words, he actually decided to use his unique skill. Breaking through the opponent's shield, he aimed for Lee Jun-kyung. He hadn't realized that someone had managed to outsmart him so ridiculously. When he broke through the shield, he found that no one was there. Taking the chance when Hercules was distracted, Lee Jun-kyung decided to attack him from the side by pointing his charged spear at him. The plan worked. He had at least managed to wound Hercules in the shoulder. It was only a matter of time before victory would be in their hands. Not even a second later, Lee Jun-kyung was struck back, flying a long distance away. This action made the giant even angrier. Demetrius laughed again at the pathetic attempts to overpower him. He knew they would try to outsmart him, but mana wasn't going to help them. Whatever Lee Jun-kyung did made Hercules laugh. He was amused to see them trying to win. His opponent didn't think so. He thought the damage was unimaginable, and though he didn't show it, he clearly wasn't having fun. As it turned out, he had more abilities than they had realized. Moreover, his body was capable of regenerating over time. But not this time. When Hercules felt dizzy, he jerked back. He didn't know what was wrong with him, for it was only a slight wound. Looking at his shoulder, he found a dark stain that began to spread instantly across his body. His arm began to go numb. It was like poison, but he was wrong. This was the very mineral the ogre mage was guarding. The red ore that gives them life could destroy a giant like Hercules. This one had two names. It could both liberate and enhance a person's abilities and drive them insane. The ore of liberation and madness. The history of this mineral has been impressive. A red ore capable of empowering ogres with strength beyond any boss had scientists studying it. People have sought various ways to utilize it, from creating tools to incorporating it into their everyday lives. Scientists realized that it had to be used differently. Their first experiment was on animals, so they learned that the ore could give them a strength that no boss could match, emancipation ore. After a while, the scientists realized that animals weren't enough for them. They were curious how the human body would react to the ore. The red ore was expected to enhance the hunter's potential, but since its madness killed every participant in the experiment, it was banned. The ore of madness. It was unimaginable. When Hercules' equilibrium was broken, Mount Catalina simply began to shake. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out behind him. Odysseus looked disapprovingly at the dark horse. He could not believe that he had decided to resort to such a measure. Even though he knew what he was doing, Odysseus was ready to fight Lee Junkyung. He knew how it would end, but he couldn't let it go. Lee Junkyung walked towards the Odyssey, remembering what was described in the book. Everything was exactly as it was then. In a fit of madness, Hercules sent his partner to another world, who tried to stop him. He had no choice but to repel his opponent's attacks. He had to hold out as long as possible. He didn't want to take his life. But Odysseus had a different opinion. He was so angry that he risked his life to confront Lee Junkyung. What he did was unforgivable. Lee Junkyung didn't want to fight him. He just needed to calm him down before Hercules switched to them. Odysseus wanted his friend back. He still had a chance. But Lee Junkyung wouldn't let him do that without wanting history to repeat itself. He tried to save him. But when Odysseus heard that there was a plan to fix it, he flew back. He didn't want to settle things by force. He would have been happy to do it another way. Not trusting the dark horse, he decided to listen to him anyway. He realized that he was not only acting in his own interests, but in the interests of the other hunters as well. Lee Junkyung only needed 5 minutes. It was necessary to hold Hercules down during that time. To Odysseus, this task seemed impossible. Impossible because the enraged giant was already rushing towards them. In a fit of madness, he was capable of destroying everyone in his path. Luckily, they managed to dodge as they scattered to the sides. Hercules flew past using his rhinoceros kick skill. As luck would have it, Catalan was behind them, and Hercules went straight for the boss of that gate. Instantly, everything turned to chaos. It was Chang's fault. She lured the beast out, knowing that it was already on their side because the last damage was not done by them. Odysseus was frightened because he did not fully understand the plan. Seeing this picture, he drew his weapon. He went on alert, saying he saw no other way out. He had to save his friend. It was dangerous to pit his madness against the lion. The red ore had an effect on the hunter for 5 minutes. If they had kept Hercules alive that long, he would have come to his senses. Of course, Lee Junkyung was acting solely for his own purposes. It was vital for him to win this raid. Otherwise, he might not be able to enter Asgard by failing the test. The hunters, seeing dozens of lifeless bodies, couldn't believe it was all Catalan's doing. He didn't have such monstrous demonic power. As soon as they raised their heads, they saw Hercules. In his maddened gaze, they could see that he wanted to end them all. It was scarier than Catalan. And then Odysseus came out of nowhere. He couldn't let his partner make a mess of all those hunters. A powerful stream of fire knocked him off course. Hercules didn't let it reach its target when he saw how fast it was coming at him. Coming from the other side, Ying Chang decided to stop Demetrius from destroying Odysseus without realizing it. She had already wanted to attack him, and like Odysseus, she had to feel a powerful jolt. The hunters watching this incredible battle were amazed. How could this be possible? For Demetrius and George were good partners. Many of them weren't even prepared to look at the spectacle. They just wanted to leave the gate to save their lives. The Egyptian Nile huntress didn't understand how the Battle of the Dungeon had turned into such a nightmare. She was curious about Innev's opinion. But he had no time to talk. When she heard him speak about red ore, she was surprised. It was forbidden. He inferred from the participants' behavior that someone had resorted to using red ore. He needed to get to the bottom of this. At last, though under the influence of the red ore, Demetrius thought he had succeeded in defeating the boss. He stared at his body with a mad look in his eyes. Chang decided to try to stop him again so that no one else would get hurt at his hands. But he didn't think so, so he instantly threw her aside. Odysseus returned to the battle. Nor did he give up hope that Hercules would come to his senses. He needed to reach the true him. In an instant, the tip of his sword touched the fist of the delirious Hercules. He seemed resigned to the fact that he had lost his friend. A black mass instantly enveloped his hand. He felt incredible pain, first of all, for having to do this to someone he cared about. He was immediately thrown back as if by an electric shock. He took fewer casualties than his opponent. Demetrius lost an arm, temporarily. His body was capable of regenerating the lost arm. His mind, however, was not. Enraged, he summoned a beastly roar. Lee Junkyung went to help the unconscious Odysseus. He had to carry him as far away as possible because Hercules would look for him. Almost as soon as he put him on the ground, he woke up. It seemed to him that those miserable 5 minutes had lasted an eternity. He wasn't the only one thinking about it. Lee Junkyung also felt like it was taking too long. In fact, more than half an hour had already passed. According to the book, all the experiments showed that the red ore had no more than a 5-minute effect on humans. It was strange that this monster continued to rampage. Before they could catch their breath, he found them. He had to take up the Muspelheim spear again. There was no other way out. The water rampage helped temporarily calm the hunter's mind. They had a chance to stop him. It was tough for the two of them. Help is at hand. Hunters from the Egyptian Nile. Wynev and his companion were on their way. They could not miss this moment to end it all. Meanwhile, Lee Junkyung rushed over to Chang. It was vital for him to know that she was okay because she had suffered so much that day. Even though she said she was fine, deep down, he knew she wouldn't last long at this rate. It wasn't worth counting on her. He longed to be just a little bit stronger, and his plea was answered. The blood absorbed by the dragon stone reversed its flow. Suddenly, he had a wild urge to cough, but all that came out was a cough of black blood. He was scared out of his wits because he had never planned to do that. With each percentage of regeneration, he was getting worse. Even Ying Chang began to suspect that something was wrong with him. Without realizing what had happened to him, she ran when she felt something wrong. It was like a demon had possessed him. Inev was scared too, but unlike her, they understood what was wrong. He was in the same condition as Demetrius. He looked terrible. His eyes were red, as if they contained blood. It was madness, with no turning back. But he hadn't realized it yet. His mind was still with him. He continued to wonder why Demetrius hadn't come to his senses yet. At this moment, the monster, who had long since lost his mind, cast his insane gaze toward Lee Junkyung, who was also gradually losing himself. Lee Junkyung thought of mana and decided to try filling his body with it. Fill his legs with mana. Gathering his strength and filled with energy, he made a mighty dash towards his enemy. Ying Chang couldn't believe what he had become. She shouted after him, hoping that he would hear her and not do it. But unfortunately, he was no longer with them. Without thinking, as if his fear had vanished, he headed straight for the jaws of the Catalan who was still alive. He swung his magic spear, intending to end it all and finally leave the gate, ending the battle beneath the dungeon with his victory. After defeating the boss, Lee Junkyung not only increased his level, but also gained some achievements, including the purest water in the forest. His mind was already darkened. Even the patron was no longer able to reach him. The demonic power was weakening him. A bloody spear with a dragon stone that had absorbed all the blood and red ore lay on the ground. Meanwhile, Lee Junkyung was already on the verge of destruction. The red ore was destroying him from the inside out. To save himself, he had to get rid of it. The flames that engulfed Lee Junkyung's body were bursting out. It seemed to be able to engulf not only its master, but also the entire Catalan mountain. The hunters were shocked to see the flames engulfing everything around them. They were afraid to imagine what had happened to its host. A terrible thing happened. The flames began sucking the mana out of every hunter in the vicinity. Not realizing what was happening, they began to panic. They could hear screams and pleas for help. It seemed that there was no way out of there alive. While the flames were absorbing the energy of the others, Lee Junkyung wanted to finish his task even though the boss was already defeated. He needed Demetrius. During the battle, Hercules' damaged arm, red hot to the max, was lost again. Not without the help of his nemesis, of course. Odysseus called out to his friend. He hoped he would pay attention to him. He had become so hardened that he was unable to feel the loss of his hand. It really wasn't scary for Demetrius. His hand was back in place in seconds. It was something startling and unimaginable. He realized that the vast amount of mana he had absorbed had caused such a phenomenon. But the fact that the dark horse had absorbed even more was frightening. Chang didn't give up hope that Lee Jung-kyung could be saved. She was afraid that it would also drag on, and they wouldn't be able to get him out. His body was on fire. The man was just consuming him, stripping all his muscles bare. What was happening to Demetrius was incomparable to what was happening to him. Odysseus was amazed at the effect the blue flame had on Lee Jung-kyung. Even though his wounds were profound, he regenerated faster than Hercules. Demetrius, who had not fully regenerated, was ready to fight the dark horse again. Even in his condition, he was still eager to defeat his opponent. Lee Jung-kyung desired it just as much. He looked down and pointed the tip of his Muspelheim spear straight at the giant's heart. Preparing his beastly roar, Demetrius waited for his enemy to land. He was confident that this time he would be able to repel the attack. Odysseus didn't like the idea. After all, using such power with an incompletely restored arm could lead to a terrible outcome. After fully recovering, his arm began to bleed profusely as if a torrent of unprecedented power was trying to escape, destroying the limb from the inside out. But he didn't pay the slightest attention to it. This wasn't Demetrius for a long time. A demonic force had taken over his mind, preventing him from feeling pain. With incredible speed, Lee Jung-kyung flew towards him. His gaze was insane. It seemed like his veins were about to pop out, so pronounced were they. Odysseus was upset and overjoyed at the same time. He couldn't believe his eyes. Lee Jung-kyung had succeeded in stopping the demonic power ruling Demetrius. And Inev was just as amazed. He watched in admiration as the dark horse overpowered the mad hunter. Alone, behind a layer of dust and smoke, they watched as Lee Jung-kyung leaned on his opponent's body and pierced the tip of his spear through Hercules. It was a victory. He watched his pathetic attempts to rise and deliver his crushing blow. But the flood of blood filling his mouth prevented him from doing so. He remained kneeling beside someone he had previously thought to be incredibly weak and incapable of hurting anyone. How wrong he'd been. It was hard for George to accept that his friend was gone. He tearfully rushed to Demetrius, hoping to change all that. It was the end for both of them. Lee Jung-kyung ceased to exist. His body was entirely at the mercy of the demonic force that had robbed him of his sanity. It was the red ore that affected the Dragonstone. The blood of the monsters and the victory over Catalan all mixed together to form a hybrid crystal. Suddenly, a powerful force enveloped the earth. A circular glow like a portal was formed, but who was to come out of it was still unknown. A mysterious figure appeared before the kneeling Demetrius. It seemed to be a woman with incredible strength, capable of anything. And so it was. Athena didn't come here without forgetting her weapon. The reason for that could have been the death of Demetrius, who shouldn't have been there. After receiving her order to crouch down to the ground, Lee Jung-kyung was unable to resist even being in such a state. The magical power pierced through him, and he fell with his head down beside his spear. It was reminiscent of the day in the future when he had already faced her. Ying-chang looked at it with bulging eyes. It was the first time she had seen a divine maiden. She had no idea what kind of power she was capable of. Even Inev and his companion were surprised. They had not expected to see Athena at this gate. Her arrival meant something terrible, for she did not just happen to be there. Odysseus was not confused. He immediately bowed to the goddess, for it was a great honor for him to see her majesty. She was perplexed. The hunters, whose main goal was to defeat the boss, led to chaos as they sought to destroy each other. Zeus was not happy. Odysseus could not find the words to explain to Athena who was in front of her. It was tough to describe a man who had done so much wrong. A dark horse. That's all that comes to mind when you look at a hunter who's steeped in dark power. His red eyes, black face. A true demon. Looking at him, Athena couldn't believe he could have caused such a disaster. She couldn't find an explanation for how he had managed to break through her shield. She didn't believe in his powers enough to foresee such a thing. She thought his entry into Asgard was just luck until he defeated Hercules himself. Feeling the power and realizing the magnitude of what was happening, she came to the conclusion that the person sitting in front of her was a danger to the world, and it was necessary to get rid of him. She took her spear in her hand without taking her eyes off the offending hunter. She knew what she had to do. She was interrupted by a sudden voice from outside. A bald figure began to approach them, asking them to stop. The voice was very familiar to her. Heimdall. She recognized him as soon as his face lit up. Not expecting to see him, she couldn't understand what he had forgotten in this place. The answer questioned him as well. After all, she had no reason to visit the gate during the dungeon battle, so there was a special reason. She was angry when she realized that Sung-gu had followed her lightning to find this place. That was unacceptable, and unfair at the very least. He stood up for Lee Jun-kyung by covering his body with himself. He made it clear that he would not allow the Dark Horse to be sent to the next world just for this chaos. Athena wasn't just angry anymore. She was consumed by rage. She just couldn't wait to end it all by killing just one poor soul. She was in Zeus's debt. But Heimdall had made her realize that the death of one man could lead to a global one, unleashing a battle with Asgard that Olympus clearly didn't want. She was amused that he was willing to break the peace by standing up for Lee Jun-kyung. She thought that there was nothing in the world that was so important to him. Suddenly, Inev intervened in their conversation. He requested permission to intervene in the conflict by sharing his thoughts on the matter. She knew that he was the leader of the Egyptian group from the Nile, so she decided to give him a chance to express his opinion on the situation. He was honored that the goddess had already heard of him. He decided to notify her that Neil had requested her protection for the Dark Horse. Athena was stunned to hear this news. She wanted to end the Dark Horse once and for all, but these words left her confused. Then Inev showed her the Eye of Osiris, proving his right to represent Nile's wishes. He hoped Athena would honor their request. It was all over. A downcast In Chang sat in the chair. She wanted to sleep poorly after such a difficult day, but she couldn't let the moment pass. And then it came. She looked up sharply, hoping that a miracle had happened and that she hadn't been waiting in vain. That's how it was. Lee Jun-kyung came to his senses. He managed to survive thanks to the fallen angel, who blessed him with purification for the work he had done. Ying-chang couldn't contain her emotions. She was so happy that tears instantly welled up in her eyes. He came to his senses without leaving her alone. It was difficult for him to say anything, as his vocal cords were barely functioning. Ying-chang was not surprised. However, she went to get help. Seeing a round wooden shield and two swords above the door, Lee Jun-kyung assumed that he was in a place belonging to the Knights of the Round Table. Not all mighty hunters sought to control the world from within. Secret communities, such as the Knights of the Round Table, had more noble ideals. Lee Jun-kyung came to the conclusion that even such a powerful organization only began taking action after England was on the verge of destruction. In any case, his body was a mere piece of meat at this point. It was ruined. The ligaments didn't work, the legs wouldn't move. Total lack of function. Looking at the sleeping Hyun Moo, he realized that there was a period when he couldn't feed his family. He just didn't have the necessary showers to wake him up. He realized this, and the thought was killing him. Without strength, he was helpless, and he wasn't even able to call for Hyun Moo's help. Mentally, he requested information about his status. How disappointed he was to find that his level had dropped to 50. Fortunately, it wouldn't last long. A little while later, Sung-gu came to visit him. Lee Jun-kyung managed to get up to greet his old friend. He noted that his body had begun to decompose under the influence of demonic power. Due to the rarity of such a phenomenon, there was no established treatment, but he could heal himself. Lee Jun-kyung was reassured by the fact that the fallen angel was on his side. After all, thanks to him and the mana flow, it wouldn't be challenging to get rid of the demonic power. Sung-gu decided not to disturb the hunter any longer, wanting him to recover as quickly as possible. They could talk about what had happened when he was better. He went to meet with the other chapters to discuss what had happened and to decide on the necessary action. Athena claimed that Lee Jun-kyung was too dangerous to society. Olympus requested a study of his skills, but Asgard was against it. They saw no reason to divulge information about their hunters, especially since what happened at the gate was entirely Olympus's responsibility. For it was he who decided to break the secret agreement with Asgard. According to it, Asgard was to emerge victorious from the battle beneath the dungeon. If they had known about Hercules' fate in the gate raid beforehand, they wouldn't have risked their hunter Lee Jun-kyung and sent him into battle. Looking at the faces of the heads present, Sungu said confidently that it was not their fault. It was Olympus that he would like to hear all the explanations. But Athena continued to stand her ground, saying that Lee Jun-kyung had a perilous power. He had to be isolated from everyone at the very least. He managed to cover the entire Mount Catalona inside the gate with blue flames and absorb the mana of the other hunters. She'd never encountered anything like it before. She insisted that they be given the Dark Horse for research. In any case, Olympus was willing to go to battle against Asgard if that was what it took. When he heard that a conflict between Olympus and Asgard was about to begin, Sungu despaired. He sincerely hoped it would never come to this. But he gathered his thoughts and recognized that absorbing the mana of other hunters with flames was dangerous. Still, he didn't deny the fact that the hunters themselves were dangerous. They looked at him with disapproval, though deep down, they knew there was some truth in what he said. It frightened them no less. He said that compared to the past, the hunters had become a source of terror and fear for everyone. And Olympus, in agreeing to the battle, recognized the degradation of its hunters. Athena was angry. She felt Sungu was guilty of showing up there. She felt angry every time she confronted him. There was a look of confusion in his eyes. He couldn't believe how she had the nerve to say it in front of everyone. Without letting him finish, she hoped that once this was over, she wouldn't want to see him again. He lowered his eyes to the floor, not wanting to look at her anymore. There was no turning back. Olympus had initiated the battle. Everything was leading up to it. In the evening, Lee Jun-kyung felt much better. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, he tried to touch the mana flow in his body and use them. He analyzed the mana movements in Demetrius's body during the battle. To achieve such power, he absorbed all the mana around him. Lee Jun-kyung had come to the conclusion that in battle, mana strengthened the strike, and in defense, it made it stronger. Now, he needed it to recover. He was actually succeeding. Thanks to the proper use of mana, he was able to speed up his recovery exponentially. Suddenly, his mouth was filled with something unpleasant. The thick, iron-flavored consistency spewed out, staining the floor around him. The reason for this was the stone's admixture of dragon blood that his body had decided to reject. He could use his mana to heal the places damaged by it. The black ball in his back was blocking the flow of mana. He had to change its flow and redirect it in the right direction. While Lee Jun-kyung was being treated, George was practicing. He was testing his attack to become more powerful. Of course, he couldn't do it alone. Ying-chang also participated. In addition to attacking, she also learned to develop her defensive reaction by repelling each of her opponent's blows. But George wasn't thrilled with her speed. He felt that she was raising her sword too slowly in the time it would take her to get hurt. She was in shock. If her speed wasn't fast enough, she didn't understand what was required of her. She felt like she couldn't go any quicker. Then she got angry and started swinging her gun around, trying to speed up. That's exactly what George meant, because the speed of humans and monsters was different. Chang, in her state of anger and adrenaline, couldn't understand a word of what her partner was saying. She wanted to achieve the desired result as soon as possible. She swung her sword, as if she were about to send George to the other side of the world. He could barely dodge her attacks. It seemed perfect. Until she got punched in the face, she thought she was doing a pretty good job. She was, but in the heat of the moment, she was just oblivious to her surroundings. At that moment, she was stunned and finally came to her senses. She had to jump back before she realized what had happened. George imagined how exhausted she was, so he suggested she finish her workout. He didn't want to beat her unconscious. Yingsheng was beginning to get worried. All the while, she was tormented by the fact that she was still being useless as well. At the Catalan gate, she had failed to prove herself. She remembered taking blows instead of fighting. She thought that was why the patron had not given her any title. She felt guilty that she couldn't even save him from the demonic force that had taken over his body and mind. She wanted to, but she couldn't. Ying Chang realized that she wasn't even worthy of being called his associate until she managed to rise even an iota. She gave herself her word to do so. He could have died. Chang couldn't forgive herself for hating her own body, which she thought was talentless and incapable of doing anything. George was about to take a shower and wiped his face with a towel. Chang came up with a seemingly ordinary request. She asked me to practice with her some more, at least one more round, afraid that George would refuse her because she was tired. But no. He admired her drive to become stronger. He saw in her a reflection of himself once doubting his usefulness. He agreed to help. Afterward, he decided to visit Demetrius. Standing beside his bunk, he pondered Chang's abilities. He had sensed her potential back at the gate. Her strength seemed incredible to him. She managed to grow stronger every time their blades clashed. He looked at the unconscious Demetrius. The urge to get stronger reminded him, of his past. His intuition told him that when he woke up, his friend would want to hear the news. He also guessed that Lee Jung-kyung was already awake. George wished Demetrius would come to his senses sooner. He couldn't wait to get his revenge, but he didn't want to do it alone. He stared at Demetrius's suction cup-covered body. He hated to see him lying there. He was used to them doing things all the time. Meanwhile, Sung-gu decided to check on Lee Jun-kyung. He also wanted to know if his condition had improved or worsened. While doing exercises and kneading his newly working body parts, Lee Jun-kyung began to suspect that there was a reason why he had been summoned. Sung-gu was happy to see that the hunter could stand on his feet again and even do some exercises. He wasn't surprised because he could expect a lot from him. Gradually, he began to focus the dialogue on what he had actually come for. He wondered if Lee Jun-kyung knew anything about the lightning bolt. His knowledge was not to be doubted, for he had read his autobiography 100 times. He was aware of the sacred artifact of Olympus, which held the power of Zeus. Sung-gu confirmed his words by noting that there were very few abilities in the world comparable to Zeus's lightning. Such skills had long been the subject of research. Lee Jun-kyung decided to catch him by mentioning Bifrost as an example of such abilities, although Sung-gu had no idea that he was aware of it. Dark Horse was tired of hiding the truth from everyone. At least he didn't want to leave his friend in the dark. He was determined to tell everything. The leader of the Big League Guild was experienced, so he said that the palace in London was not the place for such conversations. He advised me to follow him. Suddenly, they were transported into a world of fairy tales. There's no other way to call this place. Beautiful landscape, bright colors, fountains all around, silence and tranquility. This place was his sphere of influence by Vrist. He decided to ask directly who his interlocutor was, assuming he was a prophet or a regressor. Not knowing exactly how to answer his question, Lee Jun-kyung decided to smooth things over and say that he had just read a book about them, about Heimdall and his friend. He said the book was about a man known as the Demon King, his autobiography. When Sung-gu heard that, he was speechless. Everything around him seemed to freeze at that instant. He was obviously expecting to hear something about him, especially after his story. He couldn't believe his words. He could not believe his words. He thought it was stupid that in the future, Lee Jun-kyung had gone to the other world at the hands of his teacher. Lee Jun-kyung was already getting annoyed that he was taking everything literally. He was sure that he had ruined him, knowing what would happen afterward. The final way he managed to convince him of his credibility was by sharing what he knew personally about his relationship with Athena. Dark Horse even felt that Barrist was telling Sung-gu that he wasn't lying. He also hastened to add that the book wasn't finished yet. He explained that the book only described the beginning and that the future was up to Lee Jun-kyung. Most of the information about the future had been lost. Thanks to the Barrist, Sung-gu was sure that what he had said was true, or, alternatively, that the information would not harm him. But he was concerned about his intentions. Lee Jun-kyung explained to him that he wanted to change the horrible future he was born into. And since the course of events was about to change, he needed help. He apologized for not being able to tell him everything he knew, and for not diving into all sorts of details. Changing the future was simply not his goal. In the evening, Lee Jun-kyung walked to his window and noticed that someone was watching him. He looked up and saw Inev standing on a tree branch in front of his window. Inev was overjoyed to find that the Dark Horse was awake. He went upstairs to confirm his hunch. Lee Jun-kyung realized that he couldn't just show up because he was risking himself by entering the territory of the Knights of the Round Table. As it turned out, he had come to request something from him. Acting strictly under orders, he did such a daring thing. He was curious. Even though Lee Jun-kyung had heard of Inev using his veto power to protect him, he still didn't see their goals in common. Kneeling down, Inev stated that his entire request was to inform him of the need to send to the Nile. Lee Jun-kyung was surprised that he was being asked something on his knees, considering they had only crossed paths a couple of times, but he still asked why they were doing it. From below, we heard shouts that an intruder had entered the territory. Before he could answer the question, Inev looked down. He realized that he had been discovered. To avoid wasting time, he decided to answer briefly. He shouted that the necessity of going to the Nile had to do with the red ore. Then he galloped on from branch to branch, worried that he was being chased. He had to escape, or he would be arrested. Lee Jun-kyung stood by the window, staring at Inev as he ran away. He was deep in thought, not paying attention to the guards scurrying around the window. It seemed to him that no hunter was aware of the madness of the red ore. He remembered, however, that they had only begun to act when Hercules had gone mad. Suddenly, a frightened In Chang flew into the room. When she heard the alarm, she thought that someone had come to harm him. But he hastened to reassure her that nothing serious had happened. But the flickering, "for now," was quite alarming. She stared at him with her eyes bulging. She didn't understand what had happened or why, for now, she was waiting for an explanation from him. He shared that he wasn't done yet. Having overcome many things comparable to reaching the summit of a mountain, something told him that there were more global challenges ahead. While they were walking around, the trial was underway. Athena was found guilty of starting the battle, and since Olympus had broken the treaty, they were to be held responsible. Chang was insanely happy to realize that they were about to go home to Korea. She had been very tired of the hustle and bustle these past few days. Suddenly, a voice they recognized called out behind them. Lee Jun-kyung didn't immediately realize who wanted them to stop and wait. But Chang had spent enough time with him to realize that it was George. She was ready to pounce on him like a lioness protecting her child. She was surprised to see George standing near the building's door. She was surprised to see George standing by the building's door. His eyes glowed a bright blue color, and his face looked as if demonic power had gotten to him. So angry was he after the ward. Lee Jun-kyung tried to calm her down by saying that everything was fine. He didn't understand why she was reacting so violently. He told her he didn't feel threatened by George, even though he looked hostile. He just wanted to talk to the dark horse before he left. Chang was apprehensive about him, fearing he might miss the moment again and lose him. With tears in her eyes, she let him let George get close to her. He approached him with his fists clenched, but without the purpose of fighting. He just wanted to point out that Lee Jun-kyung had managed to defeat Demetrius. He came to this conclusion from the fact that the dark horse stood before him unharmed, while Demetrius still couldn't come to his senses. He thanked him for the invaluable experience he had gained from the whole situation. However, he warned him that next time, they would win. Lee Jun-kyung is not in the habit of leaving threats aside. He hinted that he never leaves his work unfinished. This next time is no exception. With a snarl, George decided to change the subject to In Chang. He asked her to help him convey a point to her that she couldn't quite put into words. Pointing his finger at her, he decided to tell her to her face that she had great potential. She could become much stronger over time. He advised her that if she wanted to earn a title, she should first gain a good reputation by paying attention to her patron. She lowered the corners of her lips as if she were unhappy with what she'd just heard. As expected, she just didn't understand what he meant. Lee Jun-kyung listened to his words and explained to her that there was no need to wait for the horse. It was time to act and become a prince. She didn't think so. After George had accomplished his mission and spoken to the boys, he left, saying that they would see each other again. Before he could get out of sight, Lee Jun-kyung called out to him. It was vital for him to warn him about something. With a wary look, George turned around. He didn't ignore it, though he felt the urge to do so. He struck a pose that made it clear he was listening. Lee Jun-kyung only wanted to cheer up by saying that Hercules would become an even stronger monster and would definitely recover. He wanted to end on a good note. There was a look of consternation in George's eyes. He didn't seem to understand why the words were spoken. Everything was taken at face value, and there was a sense of subterfuge. To smooth things over and not leave intrigue in the air, Lee Jun-kyung explained that he would like to be on the same side as them next time. Watching their distant silhouettes, George loosened his clenched fists. He felt calmer after this conversation, but he remained concerned about the fact that Demetrius was in critical condition. He needed to be sent to Olympus immediately. Before leaving, Lee Jun-kyung decided to pass his time by throwing rocks into the pond. He threw one throw after another from the bridge. Once again, as he swung over the water, a strange glow appeared over the water. Suddenly, a girl appeared. She wondered how he had found her. He immediately guessed who she was. The book describes a person named Merlin. This meeting was clearly no mere coincidence. She was surprised to hear her name. She was surprised to listen to her name. She thought he was just an ordinary man with no powers. Lee Jun-kyung decided to make a joke and say that he was the actual head of the round table. She wouldn't believe it, even though she pretended not to know who he was. Black Horse didn't believe it. Everyone had already heard of him, so there wasn't a piece of earth where he hadn't been talked about once. She knew he was the one who had been the overly arrogant hunter who had defeated Hercules. She didn't particularly like him showing up at her door and provoking her. Suddenly, the beautiful green-eyed beauty turned into a young man with blue eyes. It was impressive, but not surprising to him. She thought that all the members of the Round Table were aware that she was not to be trifled with and should never be pissed off. But she still wanted to know who was in front of her. With sinister eyes, Li Junqiong informed Merlin that he knew where the Excalibur was. He knew which side to approach it from. After the pond, he went to the airport where Chang was waiting for him. She was bored sitting there by herself, so she just looked at her papers. When she saw him, she grudgingly asked where he had been for so long. She was tired of sitting in one place and waiting for him to walk around. He didn't go into details and just shared that he had an essential meeting near the airport. Chang was very dissatisfied. She waited for him for hours while he decided to meet someone. He didn't call her. During his absence, a soft pink crystal had appeared around his neck. It glittered so brightly that it couldn't help but catch his eye. Chang didn't ignore this fact and threw a tantrum. She thought that the necklace had appeared after she met a girl. He was so taken aback by her reaction that he couldn't immediately think of something to say. He was surprised that she cared so much about where and with whom he spent his time. Suddenly, she went into a furious screaming fit, claiming that she had assumed he had someone in England, and more than one. Her jealousy was getting the better of her. Chang started accusing him of being a dog. Without letting him say a word, she continued to say that she was disappointed in him. The scandal was interrupted when Sung-gu came over. He came to check if his companions were ready to go home. The plane was about to take off. Before answering his question, Li Junqiong decided to ask him if he had taken care of everything necessary. He confirmed that everything was taken care of. Just as they were moving toward the exit to the landing strip, someone asked them to stop for a moment. Then they had to stop. Li Junqiong turned around to see who they were dealing with. However, the face of the man who had called out to them was unfamiliar to him. Turns out he was Merlin's assistant. She warned the man to wait for Li Junqiong at the airport and give him her message. She asked me to tell him that she expected him to pay her back for the necklace that hung around his neck. As it turned out, it wasn't that simple. As they were heading towards the boarding gate, Sung-gu decided to ask how Li Junqiong knew about Merlin. He explained that he made a deal with her, promising something in return. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to get the necklace. Sung-gu was clearly unhappy to realize that the necklace around his neck belonged to Merlin, especially after hearing the news that he had almost died because of it. Li Junqiong admitted that meeting them face-to-face was extremely difficult for him. However, he needed the necklace and had to go through with it. Sung-gu grinned when he heard this. He was amused to hear such a strong man say that he was afraid of meeting anyone. He seemed to be able to control everything. Finally, their plane headed home. They wished so much that the hours they had spent on the airplane would pass in the blink of an eye, and they would be in Korea. Halfway through the journey, Li Junqiong and Chang didn't speak. Even though their seats were near each other, they didn't make contact. It was like she was still sulking. After a few hours, she decided to start a dialogue with him. She still had some misunderstandings she wanted to clear up. Tired of swearing, he rolled his eyes. He turned to her and asked her what she was interested in. But her question had nothing to do with the situation at the airport. She just wanted to share her thoughts about George, who was helping her at training. She imagined herself in his shoes. If Hercules did to Li Junqiong what he had done to him, she wouldn't rest until she had avenged him. Yingchong just couldn't understand how George managed to let go of the situation and treat them as if nothing had happened. Nobility of the highest order. Li Junqiong referred to his intuition. He assumed that George guessed that his friend wasn't in danger, at least not to that extent. As soon as the plane landed and they entered the airport, they were immediately filmed. There were paparazzi everywhere, eager to get a shot of the dark horse. He was a legend. Li Junqiong didn't understand why everyone thought he had defeated Hercules. Sung-gu explained to him that a rumor was circulating in Korea that he had won the duel. Dark Horse wasn't happy that he hadn't been warned. He just wasn't prepared for the sudden influx of popularity that took him by surprise. Sung-gu wanted to surprise him. He knew that he dreamed of becoming famous and being known all over the world. And now, his dream has come true. Taking a chance, Li Junqiong decided not to hide from the camera lenses. It was his finest hour when hundreds of reporters surrounded him and he started posing. Everyone cheered and screamed and squealed. All over Europe, his incredible fight was being discussed. His name was heard from every corner. It was an unimaginable success. In the evening, he decided to spend some time with Chang. They stood on the balcony and admired the beautiful view of the starry sky. Yingchang was the first to break the silence. She was curious about what he wanted to do next. His enemies were defeated, he was in Asgard, and it would seem that he had nothing to look forward to. In fact, he had numerous unresolved issues. There was still so much to go through. The main one was ahead of him. This was just a warm-up. At the very least, he needed to repair his inventory. His Muspelheim spear was very severely damaged due to the Dragonstone absorbing the ore. And besides, Hyunmoo hadn't come to his senses. He had business in Neil. He couldn't just let down Inev, who had such high hopes for him. Surprisingly, the most urgent thing for him was to move. He had been dreaming of a house of his own since he was a child, and now his dreams could finally be realized. Chang was happy for him, even though she realized that she wasn't in his plans. She accepted the fact that he would have to cope without her for a while. Realizing this, she decided to be the first to voice what was already obvious. From that moment on, they were each on their own. It was a good incentive for her. It was clear from his reaction that he was surprised by her statement. He hadn't planned to leave her for an extended period after all. She thanked him for the time he had spent mopping up the gate. It had been a pleasure working with him, but George's words about her power were firmly planted in her mind. He was a little devastated because he was used to not being alone and knowing that he always had support. After all, she had helped him out more than once. Without her, he would be nothing. And as he looked at her, he saw a different in Chang, the one who was able to pull herself together and get over herself. She was ready for a new phase. He believed in her abilities and was glad that she was finally beginning to reveal herself. He knew that one day they would meet, and she would be much stronger than she was before. Suddenly the phone rang. It was Kim Soo. He alerted Lee Jun-kyung that the president wanted to see him. He had to be ready in the morning. He felt as if he had been struck with a hammer. His eyes went dark and his mind went blank. Jang Hyojin wanted to see him. Finally, the moment had come, and he would be officially welcomed into Asgard. But he suddenly realized that he had completely forgotten to include the most essential thing in his plans. Until now, he had been thinking about anything but what really mattered, alone. It was his only major enemy at the moment. He stood on the balcony thinking about what he should do next and what was going on with Demetrius. Meanwhile, something had happened in Olympus. A surprised George was actively on his way somewhere. It wasn't hard to guess what caused him to react that way. Demetrius. He'd just woken up and already started practicing. As if the training couldn't be put off until later, he waved his sore arms vigorously. George watched him and could not believe his happiness. In front of him was his close friend, the giant with whom he spent all his time. At last, they met. He was just as pleased with him. Such a terrifying and bizarre monster stood before him, smiling. It was the best news he'd gotten in the last week. It was embarrassing to ask him what had happened and when he had come to his senses. George felt uncomfortable asking these questions, and Demetrius, noticing this, decided to say directly that his defeat had not broken him. Though he'd never experienced it before, it was all right. This behavior surprised George. He wasn't used to seeing him so calm, but Demetrius just realized that Lee Jun-kyung had never been their enemy. Fear loomed on George's face. Looking into his eyes, he felt horror. They seemed so frightening to him, very reminiscent of that day. But he decided not to torture him and immediately indicated that he had learned to completely subdue his madness. He could use this power without side effects. As it turned out, he wasn't angry with the dark horse. On the contrary, he was grateful for the opportunity. His gift had been well worth it. Remembering Lee Jun-kyung's words that Hercules would wake up stronger and they would end up on the same side, George automatically had a smile on his face. In a matter of weeks, Yingchang had learned how to use her incredible strength. As it turned out, she was capable of taking down dozens of ogres by herself. She was no longer the weak girl who didn't believe in her abilities. She knew her worth, and she was no longer afraid of anything new. And after 3 days inside the gate, she met him, a red ogre. It seemed that all enemies had been defeated, but as it turned out, she was wrong. She was intimidated by the scale. If she'd had to face ogres before, this was many times bigger. She felt as if she had met Hercules again. He looked so frightening and disgusting that fear immediately enveloped her body. His hateful gaze and grin told her that the battle would be hard. The patron had restored her life points a little, but even with his support, she was afraid she would fail, although the monster was also seen to be holding on to his last strength. Without waiting for her to act, the ogre decided to attack. In a second, he hit the ground where Ying Chang was standing. She had been practicing her reaction for a long time, so, after dodging his blow, she decided to attack him from the side. Not realizing the mission to save the princess, she swung as hard as she could, and with a scream, she decided to plunge her weapon right into the heart of the ogre. She decided that to help the princess, all she had to do was kill the monster. Black clots of blood spurted from its huge mouth. He looked at her as if he had accepted defeat, and she had won. But no, a giant fist flew at her at the speed of light. It was an instant retaliation she hadn't expected to receive. Before she could dodge, she flew aside and fell to the ground. Facing such a powerful force, she thought she wouldn't survive the day. As she looked at the monster's lifeless body, all she could think about was that she wouldn't want to end her life like this. The healing potions were wearing off, and her strength was running low. Suddenly, a skeleton appeared in front of her, offering her to drink the potion he was holding. She thought it was a black warrior. While she was unconscious, her patron granted her the title of Siegfried. After waking up, she saw Li Junqiong in front of her with Hyun Mu. It wasn't a dream. She looked at him with a frightened look. The only question she had was where she was. This place was unfamiliar to her. With a smile on his face, Li Junqiong told her that she was at the gate. He was amused by the fact that she couldn't remember such basic things. She couldn't figure out what made her feel better. Her body felt rather strange. She assumed they had gotten the elixir from somewhere. He denied her speculation, but hurried to congratulate her on a significant milestone in her life. What she had longed for had finally come to pass. Watching Hyun Mu return to the Soulkeeper bracelet, she didn't understand what Li Junqiong was talking about. What kind of congratulations could he be talking about? Tattered and dirty, she began to worry about where her sword had gone. It wasn't just a weapon. It had dragonstone in it. They looked at the lifeless body of the ogre together. He admitted that he had watched them fight, but he could barely restrain himself from finishing him off himself. It was only his desire. He couldn't do that to In Chang, so he continued to just watch. He was proud of her aspirations to win. As she approached the ogre to retrieve her sword, she thanked them. Thanks to this victory, she was finally able to get her coveted title. After she pulled the sword from the ogre mage's body, she received a notification that the princess had been rescued and was being sponsored. She was shocked to learn that her patron, Prince Augur Siegfried, had been a girl all along. The news made her eyes water. After the green glow, a mini ogre mage appeared in front of them. It looked so strange because she had defeated him and she was going to get the princess as a reward. Before Ying Chang could even blink, an ogre jumped onto her shoulder. Her eyes bulging, she didn't realize what was happening. Li Junqiong noted that the creature was now hers. Standing with him on her shoulder, she looked at Li Junqiong. She couldn't believe her eyes or her ears that she had her own monster sitting on her shoulder. He told her that Ogric was some sort of black warrior, and he remembered to congratulate her again on being named a true hero. Ogric was incredibly happy and did not hide his delight, almost dancing on his mistress's shoulder. She allowed herself to think that she'd gotten attached to the ogre during their battle, even though it hadn't lasted very long. She thought he seemed nice enough. Li Junqiong advised her to keep her princess safe and to remember to choose a name for her. Chang was amazed at the roles assigned to the couple. Without letting her say a word, the ogre shouted incomprehensible words as if trying to help her prince. She kept talking about Gonza. When she tried to ask her what it meant, she kept saying the same thing. Then she assumed she was telling her her name. Li Junqiong looked at her and admired her. She had managed to defeat an ogre mage single-handedly. She was as good as a black warrior. He didn't want to go into the story of how they ended up in that gate. He didn't want to go into the story of how they'd gotten to this gate. She looked at him with great gratitude for having shown up at the right moment and saved her. Without his help, she wouldn't have been able to get out of there. He had more to say to her, but before that, he had to decide what to do about the big guy standing right behind them. Looking at the two-headed ogre, Li Junqiong advised her to check with everyone when mopping up the gate so that such awkward situations wouldn't happen again. After receiving her title, Ying Chang gained a heroic power that overflowed the mana flowing through her body. She had to fight the boss of the ogre village. She had a chance to immediately try out her new hero powers on such a fine opponent. She was looking forward to this battle more than ever. Pushing herself off the ground, she made a mighty leap. A second later, with a sword in hand, she was already above the boss's head. She only had one swing left to make. At this moment, the princess slept off her shoulder, making Ying Chang's heart shudder. But there was nothing to worry about. Gonzi was capable of standing up for herself. With admiration, they watched as the boss's heads split apart, and it was all thanks to the princess. She didn't seem to need a prince. Yingzhang decided to return to the conversation, which was interrupted by the monster that had suddenly appeared. She wondered what had brought them here. He came for her. He needed to go to China urgently, but it was not interesting to go alone, so he asked Yingchang to accompany him. She was shocked to hear his proposal, but her gaze was not only surprised, but also eager to go to the end of the world with him. He told her what had happened during that time. When they returned to Korea and Odin's test was passed, he wondered if their taboo would be effective. But he managed to outmaneuver him thanks to Merlin's pendant. That's how he got into Asgard, the shadowy organization pulling all the strings around the world. Hyunmoo grew up with his own body. He had not yet reached the level of the evil king of the undead army, but he could control up to 7 skeletons. There was also an addition to the bracelet, another skull. It was still inactive, though. It remains to be addressed in the future. His Muspelheim spear was restored thanks to its creator. Park Jae-hyun took the job even though he didn't want to do it. Moreover, the spear had acquired a new characteristic. It could absorb its own user, becoming a demonic spear. The recovery has been good for him. That's why Jun Kyung had to go to one of the most dangerous regions on Earth, China. Because of the gates that opened everywhere, it had become a den of monsters. And that's where you could meet him, a man capable of refining the black marble, in a place destined to become the center of an impending catastrophe.